Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Midnight Tapes. I'm Daniel Malloy. Every Friday night, at this very hour, I bring you the most fascinating, the most intriguing, and sometimes, yes, the most unbelievable stories I can find. Last week, we began an extraordinary journey into a world most of us only read about in fiction. We listened as Louis de Pointe-du-Lac, a being who claims to be a vampire, recounted the profound despair that led him to a fateful encounter in 18th century New Orleans. We left him on the precipice, watching his last sunrise, moments before an irreversible transformation. Tonight, we step over that precipice with him. Tonight, Louis describes the chilling reality of his rebirth, the awakening of a terrible thirst, and his first, terrifying lessons in immortality, guided by his relentless creator, Lestat. This part of the interview, it's not for the faint of heart. It reveals the primal, brutal nature of what it means to be a vampire, the sheer, overwhelming instinct that takes hold. So, let's go back to that dimly lit room. Let's return to Louis's voice as he takes us through his first moments as one of the undead, and the chilling lessons from Lestat that followed.
Where were we? You want to know how it happened? How I became a vampire?
Yes,
said Daniel.
How did you change exactly?
I can't tell you exactly,
said the vampire.
I can tell you about it. Enclose it with words that will make the value of it to me evident to you. But I can't tell you exactly, any more than I could tell you exactly what is the experience of sex if you have never had it.
The young man seemed struck suddenly with still another question, but before he could speak, the vampire went on.
As I told you, this vampire Lestat wanted the plantation. A mundane reason, surely, for granting me a life which will last until the end of the world. But he was not a very discriminating person. He didn't consider the world's small population of vampires as being a select club, I should say. He had human problems, a blind father who did not know his son was a vampire and must not find out. Living in New Orleans had become too difficult for him. Considering his needs and the necessity to care for his father, and he wanted Pointe-du-Lac. We went at once to the plantation the next evening, ensconced the blind father in the master bedroom, and I proceeded to make the change. I cannot say that it consisted in any one step, really, though one, of course, was the step beyond which I could make no return. But there were several acts involved, and the first was the death of the overseer. Lestat took him in his sleep. I was to watch and to approve, that is, to witness the taking of a human life as proof of my commitment and part of my change. This proved without doubt the most difficult part for me. I've told you I had no fear regarding my own death, only a squeamishness about taking my life myself. But I had a most high regard for the life of others, and a horror of death most recently developed because of my brother. I had to watch the overseer awake with a start, try to throw off Lestat with both hands, fail, then lie there struggling under Lestat's grasp, and finally go limp, drained of blood, and die. He did not die at once. We stood in his narrow bedroom for the better part of an hour, watching him die. Part of my change, as I said. Lestat would never have stayed otherwise. Then it was necessary to get rid of the overseer's body. I was almost sick from this. Weak and feverish already, I had little reserve, and handling the dead body with such a purpose caused me nausea. Lestat was laughing, telling me callously that I would feel so different once I was a vampire that I would laugh too. He was wrong about that. I never laugh at death. No matter how often and regularly, I am the cause of it. But let me take things in order. We had to drive up the river road until we came to open fields and leave the overseer there. We tore his coat, stole his money, and saw to it that his lips were stained with liquor. I knew his wife, who lived in New Orleans, and knew the state of desperation she would suffer when the body was discovered. But more than sorrow for her, I felt pain that she would never know what had happened, that her husband had not been found drunk on the road by robbers. As we beat the body, bruising the face and the shoulders, I became more and more aroused. Of course, you must realize that all this time the vampire Lestat was extraordinary. He was no more human to me than a biblical angel. But under this pressure, my enchantment with him was strained. I had seen my becoming a vampire in two lights. The first light was simply enchantment. Lestat had overwhelmed me on my deathbed. But the other light was my wish for self-destruction, my desire to be thoroughly damned. This was the open door through which Lestat had come on both the first and second occasion. Now, I was not destroying myself, but someone else. The overseer, his wife, his family. I recoiled and might have fled from Lestat, my sanity thoroughly shattered, had not he sensed with an infallible instinct what was happening. Infallible instinct.
The vampire mused.
Let me say the powerful instinct of a vampire to whom even the slightest change in a human's facial expression is as apparent as a gesture. Lestat had preternatural timing. He rushed me into the carriage and whipped the horses home. I want to die, I began to murmur. This is unbearable. I want to die. You have it in your power to kill me. Let me die. I refused to look at him, to be spellbound by the sheer beauty of his appearance. He spoke my name to me softly, laughing. As I said, he was determined to have the plantation.
But would he have let you go?
Asked Daniel.
Under any circumstances?
I don't know. Knowing Lestat as I do now, I would say he would have killed me rather than let me go. But this was what I wanted, you see. It didn't matter. No, this was what I thought I wanted. As soon as we reached the house, I jumped down out of the carriage and walked, a zombie, to the brick stairs where my brother had fallen. The house had been unoccupied for months now, the overseer having his own cottage, and the Louisiana heat and damp were already picking apart the steps. Every crevice was sprouting grass and even small wild flowers. I remember feeling the moisture which in the night was cool as I sat down on the lower steps and even rested my head against the brick and felt the little wax-stemmed wildflowers with my hands. I pulled a clump of them out of the easy dirt in one hand. I want to die. Kill me. Kill me, I said to the vampire. Now I am guilty of murder. I can't live. He sneered with the impatience of people listening to the obvious lies of others. And then in a flash, he fastened on me just as he had on my man. I thrashed against him wildly. I dug my boot into his chest and kicked him as fiercely as I could, his teeth stinging my throat, the fever pounding in my temples. And with a movement of his entire body, much too fast for me to see, he was suddenly standing disdainfully at the foot of the steps.
I thought you wanted to die, Lewis,
he said.
Daniel made a soft, abrupt sound when the vampire said his name, which the vampire acknowledged with the quick statement,
Yes, that is my name.
and went on.
Well, I lay there helpless in the face of my own cowardice and fatuousness again.
He said.
Perhaps so directly confronted with it, I might in time have gained the courage to truly take my life, not to whine and beg for others to take it. I saw myself turning on a knife then, languishing in a day-to-day suffering which I found as necessary as penance from the confessional, truly hoping death would find me unawares and render me fit for eternal pardon. And also, I saw myself, as if in a vision, standing at the head of the stairs, just where my brother had stood, and then hurtling my body down on the bricks. But there was no time for courage. Or shall I say, there was no time in Lestat's plan for anything but his plan.
Now listen to me, Louis,
he said, and he lay down beside me now on the steps, his movement so graceful and so personal that at once it made me think of a lover. I recoiled, but he put his right arm around me and pulled me close to his chest. Never had I been this close to him before, and in the dim light I could see the magnificent radiance of his eye and the unnatural mask of his skin. As I tried to move, he pressed his right fingers against my lips and said,
Be still. I am going to drain you now to the very threshold of death, and I want you to be quiet, so quiet that you can almost hear the flow of blood through your veins, so quiet that you can hear the flow of that same blood through mine. It is your consciousness, your will, which must keep you alive.
I wanted to struggle, but he pressed so hard with his fingers that he held my entire prone body in check, and as soon as I stopped my abortive attempt at rebellion, he sank his teeth into my neck.
Daniel's eyes grew huge. He had drawn farther and farther back in his chair as the vampire spoke, and now his face was tense, his eyes narrow, as if he were preparing to weather a blow.
Have you ever lost a great amount of blood?
Asked the vampire.
Do you know the feeling?
Daniel's lips shaped the word no, but no sound came out. He cleared his throat.
No,
he said.
Candles burned in the upstairs parlor where we had planned the death of the overseer. An oil lantern swayed in the breeze on the gallery. All of this light coalesced and began to shimmer, as though a golden presence hovered above me, suspended in the stairwell, softly entangled with the railings, curling and contracting like smoke.
Listen. Keep your eyes wide.
Lestat whispered to me, his lips moving against my neck. I remember that the movement of his lips raised the hair all over my body, sent a shock of sensation through my body that was not unlike the pleasure of passion.
He mused, his right fingers slightly curled beneath his chin, the first finger appearing to lightly stroke it.
The result was that within minutes I was weak to paralysis. Panic-stricken, I discovered I could not even will myself to speak. Lestat still held me, of course, and his arm was like the weight of an iron bar. I felt his teeth withdraw with such a keenness that the 2 puncture wounds seemed enormous, lined with pain. And now he bent over my helpless head and, taking his right hand off me, bit his own wrist. The blood flowed down upon my shirt and coat, and he watched it with a narrow, gleaming eye. It seemed an eternity that he watched it, and that shimmer of light now hung behind his head like the backdrop of an apparition. I think that I knew what he meant to do even before he did it, and I was waiting in my helplessness as if I'd been waiting for years. He pressed his bleeding wrist to my mouth, said firmly, a little impatiently,
Louis, drink.
And I did.
Steady, Louis.
And
hurry.
He whispered to me a number of times. I drank, sucking the blood out of the holes, experiencing for the first time since infancy the special pleasure of sucking nourishment, the body focused with the mind upon one vital source. Then something happened.
The vampire sat back, a slight frown on his face.
How pathetic it is to describe these things which can't truly be described,
he said, his voice low almost to a whisper. Daniel sat as if frozen.
I saw nothing but that light then, as I drew blood. And then this next thing was sound. A dull roar at first, and then a pounding like the pounding of a drum, growing louder and louder, as if some enormous creature were coming up on one slowly through a dark and alien forest, pounding as he came, a huge drum. And then there came the pounding of another drum, as if another giant were coming yards behind him, and each giant, intent on his own drum, gave no notice to the rhythm of the other. The sound grew louder and louder until it seemed to fill not just my hearing, but all my senses, to be throbbing in my lips and fingers, in the flesh of my temples, in my veins. Above all, in my veins, drum and then the other drum. And then Lestat pulled his wrist free suddenly, and I opened my eyes and checked myself in a moment of reaching for his wrist, grabbing it, forcing it back to my mouth at all costs. I checked myself because I realized that the drum was my heart, and the second drum had been his.
The vampire sighed.
Do you understand?
Daniel began to speak, and then he shook his head.
No, I do.
He said.
Of course,
said the vampire, looking away.
Wait,
said Daniel, in a welter of excitement.
The memory card is almost full. I have to change it.
The vampire watched patiently as he changed it.
What happened then?
Daniel asked. His face was moist, and he wiped it hurriedly with his handkerchief.
I saw as a vampire,
said the vampire, his voice now slightly detached. It seemed almost distracted. Then he drew himself up.
Lestat was standing again at the foot of the stairs, and I saw him as I could not possibly have seen him before. He had seemed white to me before, starkly white, so that in the night he was almost luminous. And now I saw him filled with his own life and own blood. He was radiant, not luminous. And then I saw that not only Lestat had changed, but all things had changed. It was as if I had only just been able to see colors and shapes for the first time. I was so enthralled with the buttons on Lestat's black coat that I looked at nothing else for a long time. Then Lestat began to laugh, and I heard his laughter as I had never heard anything before. His heart I still heard like the beating of a drum, and now came this metallic laughter. It was confusing, each sound running into the next sound, like the mingling reverberations of bells, until I learned to separate the sounds, and then they overlapped, each soft but distinct, increasing but discreet peals of laughter.
The vampire smiled with delight.
Peals of bells.
Stop looking at my buttons,
Lestat said.
Go out there into the trees. Rid yourself of all the human waste in your body, and don't fall so madly in love with the night that you lose your ways.
That, of course, was a wise command. When I saw the moon on the flagstones, I became so enamored with it that I must have spent an hour there. I passed my brother's oratory without so much as a thought of him, and standing among the cottonwood and oaks, I heard the night as if it were a chorus of whispering women, all beckoning me to their breasts. As for my body, it was not yet totally converted, and as soon as I became the least accustomed to the sounds and sights, it began to ache. All my human fluids were being forced out of me. I was dying as a human, yet completely alive as a vampire, and with my awakened senses, I had to preside over the death of my body with a certain discomfort, and then, finally, fear. I ran back up the steps to the parlor, where Lestat was already at work on the plantation papers, going over the expenses and profits for the last year.
You're a rich man,
he said to me when I came in. Something's happening to me, I shouted.
You're dying, that's all. Don't be a fool. Don't you have any oil lamps? All this money, and you can't afford whale oil except for that lantern. Bring me that lantern.
Dying, I shouted. Dying.
It happens to everyone,
he persisted, refusing to help me. As I look back on this, I still despise him for it, not because I was afraid, but because he might have drawn my attention to these changes with reverence. He might have calmed me and told me I might watch my death with the same fascination with which I had watched and felt the night. But he didn't. Lestat was never the vampire I am. Not at all. The vampire did not say this boastfully. He said it as if he would truly have had it otherwise. Alors,
he sighed.
I was dying fast, which meant that my capacity for fear was diminishing as rapidly. I simply regret I was not more attentive to the process. Lestat was being a perfect idiot.
Oh, for the love of hell!
He began shouting.
Do you realize I've made no provision for you? What a fool I am!
I was tempted to say, yes, you are, but I didn't.
You'll have to bed down with me this morning. I haven't prepared you a coffin.
The vampire laughed. The coffin struck such a chord of terror in me, I think it absorbed all the capacity for terror I had left. Then came only my mild alarm at having to share a coffin with Lestat. He was in his father's bedroom meantime, telling the old man goodbye, that he would return in the morning.
But where do you go? Why must you live by such a schedule?
The old man demanded, and Lestat became impatient. Before this, he'd been gracious to the old man, almost to the point of sickening one. But now, he became a bully.
I take care of you, don't I? I've put a better roof over your head than you ever put over mine. If I want to sleep all day and drink all night, I'll do it, damn you.
The old man started to whine. Only my peculiar state of emotions and most unusual feeling of exhaustion kept me from disapproving. I was watching the scene through the open door, enthralled with the colours of the counterpane and the positive riot of colour in the old man's face. His blue veins pulsed beneath his pink and greyish flesh. I found even the yellow of his teeth appealing to me, and I became almost hypnotized by the quivering of his lip.
Such a son,
he said, never suspecting, of course, the true nature of his son.
All right then, go. I know you keep a woman somewhere. You go to see her as soon as her husband leaves in the morning. Give me my rosary. What's happened to my rosary?
Lestat said something blasphemous and gave him the rosary.
But
Daniel started.
Yes,
said the vampire.
I'm afraid I don't allow you to ask enough questions.
I was going to ask, rosaries have crosses on them, don't they?
Oh, the rumour about crosses.
The vampire laughed.
You refer to our being afraid of crosses?
Unable to look on them, I thought,
said Daniel.
Nonsense, my friend, sheer nonsense. I can look on anything I like, and I rather like looking on crucifixes in particular.
And what about the rumor about keyholes, that you can become steam and go through them?
I wish I could,
laughed the vampire.
How positively delightful. I should like to pass through all manner of different keyholes and feel the tickle of their peculiar shapes. No.
He shook his head.
That is, how would you say today, bullshit?
Daniel laughed despite himself. Then his face grew serious.
You mustn't be so shy with me,
the vampire said.
What is it?
The story about stakes through the heart,
said Daniel, his cheeks coloring slightly.
The same,
said the vampire.
Bullshit,
he said, carefully articulating both syllables, so that Daniel smiled.
No magical power whatsoever. Why don't you smoke one of your cigarettes? I see you have them in your shirt pocket.
Oh, thank you,
Daniel said, as if it were a marvelous suggestion. But once he had the cigarette to his lips, his hands were trembling so badly that he mangled the first fragile book match.
Allow me,
said the vampire, and taking the book, he quickly put a lighted match to Daniel's cigarette. Daniel inhaled, his eyes on the vampire's fingers. Now the vampire withdrew across the table with a soft rustling of garments.
There's an ashtray on the basin,
he said, and Daniel moved nervously to get it. He stared at the few butts in it for a moment, and then seeing the small wastebasket beneath, he emptied the ashtray and quickly set it on the table. His fingers left damp marks on the cigarette when he put it down.
Is this your room?
he asked.
No,
Answered the vampire.
just a room.
What happened then?
Daniel asked. The vampire appeared to be watching the smoke gather beneath the overhead bulb.
Ah, we went back to New Orleans post-haste.
He said.
Lestat had his coffin in a miserable room near the ramparts.
And you did get into the coffin?
I had no choice. I begged Lestat to let me stay in the closet, but he laughed, astonished.
Don't you know what you are?
He asked. But is it magical? Must it have this shape? I pleaded, only to hear him laugh again. I couldn't bear the idea, but as we argued, I realized I had no real fear. It was a strange realization. All my life I'd feared closed places. Born and bred in French houses with lofty ceilings and floor-length windows, I had a dread of being enclosed. I felt uncomfortable even in the confessional in church. It was a normal enough fear. And now I realized as I protested to Lestat, I did not actually feel this anymore. I was simply remembering it, hanging on to it from habit, from a deficiency of ability to recognize my present and exhilarating freedom.
You're carrying on badly,
Lestat said finally.
and it's almost dawn. I should let you die. You will die, you know. The sun will destroy the blood I've given you, in every tissue, every vein. But you shouldn't be feeling this fear at all. I think you're like a man who loses an arm or a leg and keeps insisting that he can feel pain where the arm or leg used to be.
Well, that was positively the most intelligent and useful thing Lestat ever said in my presence, and it brought me around at once.
Now, I'm getting into the coffin,
He finally said to me in his most disdainful tone.
and you will get in on top of me if you know what's good for you.
And I did. I lay face down on him, utterly confused by my absence of dread and filled with a distaste for being so close to him, handsome and intriguing though he was. And he shut the lid. Then I asked him if I was completely dead. My body was tingling and itching all over.
No, you're not, then.
He said.
When you are, you'll only hear and see it changing and feel nothing. You should be dead by tonight. Go to sleep.
Was he right? Were you dead when you woke up?
Yes, changed, I should say. As obviously I am alive. My body was dead. It was some time before it became absolutely cleansed of the fluids and matter it no longer needed. But it was dead. And with the realization of it came another stage in my divorce from human emotions. The first thing which became apparent to me, even while Lestat and I were loading the coffin into a hearse and stealing another coffin from a mortuary, was that I did not like Lestat at all. I was far from being his equal yet, but I was infinitely closer to him than I had been before the death of my body. I can't really make this clear to you for the obvious reason that you are now as I was before my body died. You cannot understand, but before I died, Lestat was absolutely the most overwhelming experience I'd ever had. Your cigarette has become one long cylindrical ash.
Oh,
Daniel quickly ground the filter into the glass.
you mean that when the gap was closed between you, he lost his spell?
He asked, his eyes quickly fixed on the vampire, his hands now producing a cigarette and match much more easily than before.
Yes, that's correct.
Said the vampire with obvious pleasure.
The trip back to Pointe du Lac was thrilling, and the constant chatter of Lestat was positively the most boring and disheartening thing I experienced. Of course, as I said, I was far from being his equal. I had my dead limbs to contend with, to use his comparison. And I learned that on that very night, when I had to make my first kill.
The vampire reached across the table now and gently brushed an ash from Daniel's lapel, and Daniel stared at his withdrawing hand in alarm.
"Excuse me,"
Said the vampire.
"I didn't mean to frighten you."
Excuse me,
Said Daniel.
I just got the impression suddenly that your arm was abnormally long. You reached so far without moving.
No,
said the vampire, resting his hands again on his crossed knees.
I moved forward much too fast for you to see. It was an illusion.
You moved forward, but you didn't. You were sitting just as you are now, with your back against the chair.
No,
Repeated the vampire firmly.
I moved forward as I told you. Here, I'll do it again.
And he did it again, and Daniel stared with the same mixture of confusion and fear.
You still didn't see it.
Said the vampire.
But you see, if you look at my outstretched arm now, it's really not remarkably long at all.
And he raised his arm, first finger pointing heavenward, as if he were an angel about to give of the word of the Lord.
You have experienced a fundamental difference between the way you see and I see. My gesture appeared slow and somewhat languid to me, and the sound of my finger brushing your coat was quite audible. Well, I didn't mean to frighten you, I confess, but perhaps you can see from this that my return to Pointe-du-Lac was a feast of new experiences, the mere swaying of a tree branch in the wind a delight.
Yes,
Said Daniel, but he was still visibly shaken. The vampire eyed him for a moment, and then he said,
I was telling you.
about your first kill.
Said Daniel.
Yes. I should say first, however, that the plantation was in a state of pandemonium. The overseer's body had been found, and so had the blind old man in the master bedroom, and no one could explain the blind old man's presence, and no one had been able to find me in New Orleans. My sister had contacted the police, and several of them were at Pointe-du-Lac when I arrived. It was already quite dark, naturally, and Lestat quickly explained to me that I must not let the police see me in even minimal light, especially not with my body in its present remarkable state. So I talked to them in the avenue of oaks before the plantation house, ignoring their request that we go inside. I explained I'd been to Pointe-du-Lac the night before, and the blind old man was my guest. As for the overseer, he had not been here, but had gone to New Orleans on business. After that was settled, during which my new detachment served me admirably, I had the problem of the plantation itself. My slaves were in a state of complete confusion, and no work had been done all day. We had a large plant then for the making of the indigo dye, and the overseer's management had been most important. But I had several extremely intelligent slaves who might have done his job just as well a long time before, if I had recognized their intelligence and not feared their African appearance and manner. I studied them clearly now and gave the management of things over to them. To the best, I gave the overseer's house on a promise. 2 of the young women were brought back into the house from the fields to care for Lestat's father, and I told them I wanted as much privacy as possible, and they would all of them be rewarded not only for service, but for leaving me and Lestat absolutely alone. I did not realize at the time that these slaves would be the first, and possibly the only ones, to ever suspect that Lestat and I were not ordinary creatures. I failed to realize that their experience with the supernatural was far greater than that of white men. In my own inexperience, I still thought of them as childlike savages, barely domesticated by slavery. I made a bad mistake, but let me keep to my story. I was going to tell you about my first kill. Lestat bungled it, with his characteristic lack of common sense.
Bungled it?
Asked Daniel.
I should never have started with human beings, but this was something I had to learn by myself. Lestat had us plunge headlong into the swamps right after the police and the slaves were settled. It was very late, and the slave cabins were completely dark. We soon lost sight of the lights of Pointe-du-Lac altogether, and I became very agitated. It was the same thing again. Remembered fears, confusion. Lestat, had he any native intelligence, might have explained things to me patiently and gently, that I had no need to fear the swamps, that to snakes and insects I was utterly invulnerable, and that I must concentrate on my new ability to see in total darkness. Instead, harassed me with condemnations. He was concerned only with our victims, with finishing my initiation and getting on with it. And when we finally came upon our victims, he rushed me into action. They were a small camp of runaway slaves. Lestat had visited them before and picked off perhaps a fourth of their number by watching from the dark for one of them to leave the fire, or by taking them in their sleep. They knew absolutely nothing of Lestat's presence. We had to watch for well over an hour before one of the men, they were all men, finally left the clearing and came just a few paces into the trees. He unhooked his pants now and attended to an ordinary physical necessity. And as he turned to go, Lestat shook me and said,
"Take him."
The vampire smiled at Daniel's wide eyes.
"I think I was about as horror-struck as you would be,"
he said.
"But I didn't know then that I might kill animals instead of humans." I said quickly I could not possibly take him, and the slave heard me speak. He turned, his back to the distant fire, and peered into the dark. Then quickly and silently, he drew a long knife out of his belt. He was naked except for the pants and the belt, a tall, strong-armed, sleek young man. He said something in the French patois, and then he stepped forward. I realized that, though I saw him clearly in the dark, he could not see us. Lestat stepped in back of him with a swiftness that baffled me and got a hold around his neck while he pinned his left arm. The slave cried out and tried to throw Lestat off. He sank his teeth now, and the slave froze as if from snakebite. He sank to his knees, and Lestat fed fast as the other slaves came running.
"You sicken me,"
he said when he got back to me. It was as if we were black insects utterly camouflaged in the night, watching the slaves move, oblivious to us, discover the wounded man, drag him back, fan out in the foliage searching for the attacker.
"Come on, we have to get another one before they all return to camp,"
he said. And quickly we set off after one man who was separated from the others. I was still terribly agitated, convinced I couldn't bring myself to attack, and feeling no urge to do so. There were many things, as I mentioned, which Lestat might have said and done. He might have made the experience rich in so many ways, but he did not.
What could he have done?
Daniel asked.
What do you mean?
Killing is no ordinary act,
said the vampire.
One doesn't simply glut oneself on blood.
He shook his head.
It is the experience of another's life for certain, and often the experience of the loss of that life through the blood, slowly. It is again and again the experience of that loss of my own life, which I experienced when I sucked the blood from Lestat's wrist and felt his heart pound with my heart. It is again and again a celebration of that experience, because for vampires, that is the ultimate experience.
He said this most seriously, as if he were arguing with someone who held a different view.
I don't think Lestat ever appreciated that, though how he could not, I don't know. Let me say he appreciated something, but very little, I think, of what there is to know. In any event, he took no pains to remind me now of what I'd felt when I clamped onto his wrist for life itself and wouldn't let it go, or to pick and choose a place for me where I might experience my first kill with some measure of quiet and dignity. He rushed headlong through the encounter as if it was something to put behind us as quickly as possible, like so many yards of the road. Once he had caught the slave, he gagged him and held him, baring his neck.
"Do it,"
he said.
"You can't turn back now."
Overcome with revulsion and weak with frustration, I obeyed. I knelt beside the bent, struggling man, and clamping both my hands on his shoulders, I went into his neck. My teeth, had only just begun to change, and I had to tear his flesh, not puncture it. But once the wound was made, the blood flowed, and once that happened, once I was locked to it, drinking, all else vanished. Lestat and the swamp and the noise of the distant camp meant nothing. Lestat might have been an insect, buzzing, lighting, then vanishing in significance. The sucking mesmerized me. The warm struggling of the man was soothing to the tension of my hands, and there came the beating of the drum again, which was the drum beat of his heart only. This time it beat in perfect rhythm with the drum beat of my own heart, the two resounding in every fibre of my being, until the beat began to grow slower and slower, so that each was a soft rumble that threatened to go on without end. I was drowsing, falling into weightlessness, and then Lestat pulled me back.
"He's dead, you idiot,"
he said, with his characteristic charm and tact.
"You don't drink after they're dead. Understand that?"
I was in a frenzy for a moment, not myself, insisting to him that the man's heart still beat, and I was in an agony to clamp onto him again. I ran my hands over his chest, then grabbed at his wrists. I would have cut into his wrist if Lestat hadn't pulled me to my feet and slapped my face. This slap was astonishing. It was not painful in the ordinary way. It was a sensational shock of another sort, a rapping of the senses, so that I spun in confusion and found myself helpless and staring, my back against a cypress, the night pulsing with insects in my ears.
"You'll die if you do that,"
Lestat was saying.
"He'll suck you right down into death with him if you cling to him in death. And now you've drunk too much. Besides, you'll be ill."
His voice grated on me. I had the urge to throw myself on him suddenly, but I was feeling just what he'd said. There was a grinding pain in my stomach, as if some whirlpool there was sucking my insides into itself. It was the blood passing too rapidly into my own blood, but I didn't know it. Lestat moved through the night now like a cat, and I followed him, my head throbbing. This pain in my stomach no better when we reached the house of Point du Lac. As we sat at the table in the parlour, Lestat dealing a game of solitaire on the polished wood, I sat there staring at him with contempt. He was mumbling nonsense. I would get used to killing, he said. It would be nothing. I must not allow myself to be shaken. I was reacting too much as if the mortal coil had not been shaken off. I would become accustomed to things all too quickly. "Do you think so?" I asked him finally. I really had no interest in his answer. I understood now the difference between us. For me, the experience of killing had been cataclysmic. So had that of sucking Lestat's wrist. These experiences so overwhelmed and so changed my view of everything around me, from the picture of my brother on the parlour wall to the sight of a single star in the topmost pane of the French window, that I could not imagine another vampire taking them for granted. I was altered, permanently. I knew it, and what I felt most profoundly for everything, even the sound of the playing cards being laid down one by one upon the shining rows of the solitaire, was respect. Lestat felt the opposite, or he felt nothing. He was the sow's ear out of which nothing fine could be made. As boring as a mortal, as trivial and unhappy as a mortal, he chatted over the game, belittling my experience, utterly locked against the possibility of any experience of his own. By morning, I realized that I was his complete superior, and I had been sadly cheated in having him for a teacher. He must guide me through the necessary lessons, if there were any more real lessons, and I must tolerate in him a frame of mind which was blasphemous to life itself. I felt cold towards him. I had no contempt in superiority, only a hunger for new experience, for that which was beautiful and as devastating as my kill. And I saw that if I were to maximize every experience available to me, I must exert my own powers over my learning. Lestat was of no use. It was well past midnight when I finally rose out of the chair and went out on the gallery. The moon was large over the cypresses, and the candlelight poured from the open doors. The thick plastered pillars and walls of the house had been freshly whitewashed, the floorboards freshly swept, and a summer rain had left the night clean and sparkling with drops of water. I leaned against the end pillar of the gallery, my head touching the soft tendrils of a jasmine, which grew there in constant battle with the wisteria, and I thought of what lay before me throughout the world and throughout time, and resolved to go about it delicately and reverently, learning that from each thing which would take me best to another. What this meant, I wasn't sure myself. Do you understand me when I say I did not wish to rush headlong into experience? That what I'd felt as a vampire was far too powerful to be wasted?
Yes,
said Daniel eagerly.
it sounds as if it was like being in love.
The vampire's eyes gleamed.
That's correct. It is like love.
He smiled.
And I tell you my frame of mind that night, so you can know there are profound differences between vampires, and how I came to take a different approach from Lestat. You must understand I did not snub him, because he did not appreciate his experience. I simply could not understand how such feelings could be wasted. But then Lestat did something which was to show me a way to go about my learning. He had more than a casual appreciation of the wealth at Pointe du Lac. He'd been much pleased by the beauty of the china used for his father's supper, and he liked the feel of the velvet drapes, and he traced the patterns of the carpets with his toe. And now he took from one of the china closets a crystal glass and said,
I do miss glasses.
Only he said this with an impish delight that caused me to study him with a hard eye. I disliked him intensely.
I want to show you a little trick.
He said.
That is, if you like glasses.
And after setting it on the card table, he came out on the gallery, where I stood, and changed his manner again into that of a stalking animal, eyes piercing the dark beyond the lights of the house, peering down under the arching branches of the oaks. In an instant, he had vaulted the railing and dropped softly on the dirt below, and then lunged into the blackness to catch something in both his hands. When he stood before me with it, I gasped to see it was a rat.
Don't be such a damned idiot,
he said.
Haven't you ever seen a rat?
It was a huge, struggling field rat with a long tail. He held its neck so it couldn't bite.
Rats can be quite nice,
he said. And he took the rat to the wineglass, slashed its throat, and filled the glass rapidly with blood. The rat then went hurtling over the gallery railing, and Lestat held the wineglass to the candle triumphantly.
You may well have to live off rats from time to time, so wipe that expression off your face,
he said.
Rats, chickens, cattle. Travelling by ship, you damn well better live off rats, if you don't wish to cause such a panic on board that they search your coffin. You damn well better keep the ship clean of rats.
And then he sipped the blood as delicately as if it were burgundy. He made a slight face.
It gets cold so fast.
Do you mean then we can live from animals? I asked.
Yes.
He drank it all down, and then casually threw the glass at the fireplace. I stared at the fragments.
You don't mind, do you?
He gestured to the broken glass with a sarcastic smile.
I surely hope you don't, because there's nothing much you can do about it if you do mind.
I can throw you and your father out of Pointe du Lac if I mind, I said. I believe this was my first show of temper.
Why would you do that?
He asked with mock alarm.
You don't know everything yet, do you?
He was laughing then, and walking slowly about the room. He ran his fingers over the satin finish of the spinet.
Do you play?
He asked. I said something like, "Don't touch it," and he laughed at me.
I'll touch it if I like,
He said.
You don't know, for example, all the ways you can die. And dying now would be such a calamity, wouldn't it?
There must be someone else in the world to teach me these things, I said. Certainly you're not the only vampire. And your father, he's perhaps 70. You couldn't have been a vampire long, so someone must have instructed you.
And do you think you can find other vampires by yourself? They might see you coming, my friend, but you won't see them. No, I don't think you have much choice about things at this point, friend. I'm your teacher, and you need me, and there isn't much you can do about it either way. And we both have people to provide for. My father needs a doctor, and then there is the matter of your mother and sister. Don't get any mortal notions about telling them you are a vampire. Just provide for them and for my father, which means that tomorrow night you had better kill fast and then attend to the business of your plantation. Now to bed. We both sleep in the same room. It makes for far less risk.
No, you secure the bedroom for yourself, I said. I've no intention of staying in the same room with you. He became furious.
Don't do anything stupid, Louis. I warn you. There's nothing you can do to defend yourself once the sun rises. Nothing. Separate rooms mean separate security. Double precautions and double chance of notice.
He then said a score of things to frighten me into complying, but he might as well have been talking to the walls. I watched him intently, but I didn't listen to him. He appeared frail and stupid to me, a man made of dried twigs with a thin, carping voice. I sleep alone, I said, and gently put my hand around the candle flames one by one.
It's almost morning,
he insisted. So lock yourself in, I said, embracing my coffin, hoisting it and carrying it down the brick stairs. I could hear the lock snapping on the French doors above, the swoosh of the drapes. The sky was pale but still sprinkled with stars, and another light rain blew now on the breeze from the river, speckling the flagstones. I opened the door of my brother's oratory, shoving back the roses and thorns which had almost sealed it, and set the coffin on the stone floor before the prie-dieu. I could almost make out the images of the saints on the walls. "Paul," I said softly, addressing my brother, "for the first time in my life I feel nothing for you, nothing for your death. Arid, for the first time I feel everything for you, feel the sorrow of your loss, as if I never before knew feeling. You see?"
The vampire turned to Daniel.
For the first time now I was fully and completely a vampire. I shut the wood blinds flat upon the small barred windows and bolted the door. Then I climbed into the satin-lined coffin, barely able to see the gleam of cloth in the darkness, and locked myself in. That is how I became a vampire.
And there you were,
said Daniel after a pause.
with another vampire you hated.
But I had to stay with him.
Answered the vampire.
As I've told you, he had me at a great disadvantage. He hinted there was much I didn't know and must know, and that he alone could tell me. But in fact, the main part of what he did teach me was practical and not so difficult to figure out for oneself. How we might travel, for instance, by ship, having our coffins transported for us as though they contained the remains of loved ones being sent here or there for burial. How no one would dare to AP such a coffin, and we might rise from it at night to clean the ship of rats, things of this nature. And then there were the shops and businessmen he knew who admitted us well after hours to outfit us in the finest Paris fashions, and those agents willing to transact financial matters in restaurants and cabarets. And in all of these mundane matters, Lestat was an adequate teacher. What manner of man he'd been in life I couldn't tell and didn't care. But he was for all appearances of the same class now as myself, which meant little to me, except that it made our lives run a little more smoothly than they might have otherwise. He had impeccable taste, though my library to him was a pile of dust, and he seemed more than once to be infuriated by the sight of my reading a book or writing some observations in a journal.
"That mortal nonsense,"
he would say to me, while at the same time spending so much of my money to splendidly furnish Pointe du Lac, that even I, who cared nothing for the money, was forced to wince. And in entertaining visitors at Pointe du Lac, those hapless travellers who came up the river road by horseback or carriage, begging accommodations for the night, sporting letters of introduction from other planters or officials in New Orleans. To these, he was so gentle and polite that it made things far easier for me, who found myself hopelessly locked to him and jarred over and over by his viciousness.
But he didn't harm these men?
Asked Daniel.
Oh yes, often he did. But I'll tell you a little secret if I may, which applies not only to vampires, but to generals, soldiers, and kings. Most of us would much rather see somebody die than be the object of rudeness under our roofs. Strange. Yes, but very true, I assure you, that Lestat hunted for mortals every night, I knew. But had he been savage and ugly to my family, my guests, and my slaves, I couldn't have endured it. He was not. He seemed particularly to delight in the visitors, but he said we must spare no expense where our families were concerned. And he seemed to me to push luxury upon his father to an almost ludicrous point. The old blind man must be told constantly how fine and expensive were his bed jackets and robes, and what imported draperies had just been fixed to his bed, and what French and Spanish wines we had in the cellar, and how much the plantation yielded even in bad years, when the coast talked of abandoning the indigo production altogether and going into sugar. But then, at other times, he would bully the old man, as I mentioned. He would erupt into such rage that the old man whimpered like a child.
"Don't I take care of you in baronial splendor?"
Lestat would shout at him.
"Don't I provide for your every want? Stop whining to me about going to church or old friends. Such nonsense. Your old friends are dead. Why don't you die and leave me and my bankroll in peace?"
The old man would cry softly that these things meant so little to him in old age. He would have been content on his little farm forever. I wanted often to ask him later, where was this farm? From where did you come to Louisiana? To get some clue to that place where Lestat might have known another vampire. But I didn't dare to bring these things up, lest the old man start crying and Lestat become enraged. But these fits were no more frequent than periods of near obsequious kindness, when Lestat would bring his father supper on a tray and feed him patiently while talking of the weather and the New Orleans news and the activities of my mother and sister. It was obvious that a great gulf existed between father and son, both in education and refinement, but how it came about, I could not quite guess. And from this whole matter, I achieved a somewhat consistent detachment. Existence, as I've said, was possible. There was always the promise behind his mocking smile that he knew great things or terrible things, had commerce with levels of darkness I could not possibly guess at. And all the time he belittled me and attacked me for my love of the senses, my reluctance to kill, and the near swoon which killing could produce in me. He laughed uproariously when I discovered that I could see myself in a mirror, and that crosses had no effect upon me, and would taunt me with sealed lips when I asked about God or the devil.
"I'd like to meet the devil some night,"
he said once with a malignant smile.
"I'd chase him from here to the wilds of the Pacific. I am the devil.
And when I was aghast at this, he went into peals of laughter. But what happened was simply that in my distaste for him, I came to ignore and suspect him, and yet to study him with a detached fascination. Sometimes I'd find myself staring at his wrist, from which I'd drawn my vampire life, and I would fall into such a stillness that my mind seemed to leave my body, or rather, my body to become my mind. And then he would see me and stare at me with a stubborn ignorance of what I felt, and long to know, and reaching over, shake me roughly out of it. I bore this with an overt detachment unknown to me in mortal life, and came to understand this as a part of vampire nature, that I might sit at home at Pointe du Lac and think for hours of my brother's mortal life and see it short and rounded in unfathomable darkness, understanding now the vain and senseless wasting passion with which I'd mourned his loss and turned on other mortals like a maddened animal. All that confusion was then like dancers frenzied in a fog. And now in this strange vampire nature, I felt a profound sadness. But I did not brood over this. Let me not give you that impression, for brooding would have been to me the most terrible waste. But rather, I looked around me at all the mortals that I knew, and saw all life as precious, condemning all fruitless guilt and passion that would let it slip through the fingers like sand. It was only now as a vampire that I did come to know my sister, forbidding her the plantation for the city life which she so needed, in order to know her own time of life and her own beauty, and come to marry, not brood for our lost brother, or my going away, or become a nursemaid for our mother. And I provided for them all they might need or want, finding even the most trivial request worth my immediate attention. My sister laughed at the transformation in me when we would meet at night, and I would take her from our flat out the narrow wooden streets to walk along the tree-lined levee in the moonlight, savouring the orange blossoms and the caressing warmth, talking for hours of her most secret thoughts and dreams, those little fantasies she dared to tell no one, and would even whisper to me when we sat in the dim-lit parlour entirely alone. And I would see her sweet and palpable before me, a shimmering, precious creature soon to grow old, soon to die, soon to lose these moments that in their tangibility promised to us wrongly, an immortality, as if it were our very birthright, which we could not come to grasp the meaning of until this time of middle life when we looked on only as many years ahead as already lay behind us, when every moment must be first known and then savoured. It was detachment that made this possible, a sublime loneliness with which Lestat and I moved through the world of mortal men. And all material troubles passed from us. I should tell you the practical nature of it. Lestat had always known how to steal from victims chosen for sumptuous dress and other promising signs of extravagance. But the great problems of shelter and secrecy had been for him a terrible struggle. I suspected that beneath his gentleman's veneer, he was painfully ignorant of the most simple financial matters. But I was not, and so he could acquire cash at any moment, and I could invest it. If he were not picking the pocket of a dead man in an alley, he was at the greatest gambling tables in the richest salons of the city, using his vampire keenness to suck gold and dollars and deeds of property from young planters' sons, who found him deceptive in his friendship and alluring in his charm. But this had never given him the life he wanted, and so for that, he had ushered me into the preternatural world, that he might acquire an investor and manager for whom these skills of mortal life became most valuable in this life after. But let me describe New Orleans as it was then, and as it was to become, so you can understand how simple our lives were, There was no city in America like New Orleans. It was filled not only with the French and Spanish of all classes, who had formed in part its peculiar aristocracy, but later with immigrants of all kinds, the Irish and the German in particular. Then there were not only the black slaves, yet unhomogenized and fantastical in their different tribal garb and manners, but the great growing class of the free people of color, those marvelous people of our mixed blood and that of the islands, who produced a magnificent and unique cast of craftsmen, artists, poets, and renowned feminine beauty. And then there were the Indians, who covered the levee on summer days selling herbs and crafted wares, and drifting through this medley of languages and colors, were the people of the port, the sailors of ships, who came in great waves to spend their money in the cabarets, to buy for the night the beautiful women both dark and light, to dine on the best of Spanish and French cooking, and drink the imported wines of the world. Then add to these, within years after my transformation, the Americans, who built the city upriver from the old French quarter, with magnificent Grecian houses, which gleamed in the moonlight like temples. And of course, the planters, always the planters, coming to town with their families in shining landaus, to buy evening gowns and silver and gems, to crowd the narrow streets on the way to the old French Opera House and the Théâtre d'Orléans and the St. Louis Cathedral, from whose open doors came the chants of High Mass over the crowds of the Place d'Armes on Sundays, over the noise and bickering of the French market, over the silent ghostly drift of the ships along the raised waters of the Mississippi, which flowed against the levee above the ground of New Orleans itself, so that the ships appeared to float against the sky. This was New Orleans, a magical and magnificent place to live, in which a vampire, richly dressed and gracefully walking through the pools of light of one gas lamp after another, might attract no more notice in the evening than hundreds of other exotic creatures, if he attracted any at all, if anyone stopped to whisper behind a fan, "That man, how pale, how he gleams, how he moves. It's not natural." A city in which a vampire might be gone before the words had even passed the lips, seeking out the alleys in which he could see like a cat, the darkened bars in which sailors slept with their heads on the table, great high-ceilinged hotel rooms where a lone figure might sit, her feet upon an embroidered cushion, her legs covered with a lace counterpane, her head bent under the tarnished light of a single candle, never seeing the great shadow move across the plaster flowers of the ceiling, never seeing the long white finger reached to press the fragile flame. Remarkable, if for nothing else, because of this, that all of those men and women who stayed for any reason left behind them some monument, some structure of marble and brick and stone that still stands, so that even when the gas lamps went out and the planes came in, and the office buildings crowded the blocks of Canal Street, something irreducible of beauty and romance remained, not in every street perhaps, but in so many that the landscape is for me the landscape of those times always, and walking now in the starlit streets of the quarter or the garden district, I am in those times again. I suppose that is the nature of the monument. Be it a small house or a mansion of Corinthian columns and wrought iron lace, the monument does not say that this or that man walked here. No, that what he felt in one time in one spot continues. The moon that rose over New Orleans then still rises. As long as the monuments stand, it still rises. The feeling, at least here and there, it remains the same. The vampire appeared sad. He sighed, as if he doubted what he had just said.
"What was it?"
he asked suddenly, as if he was slightly tired. "Yes, money. Lestat and I had to make money. And I was telling you that he could steal. But it was investment afterwards that mattered. What we accumulated we must use. But I go ahead of myself. I killed animals. But I'll get to that in a moment. Lestat killed humans all the time. Sometimes 2 or 3 a night, sometimes more. He would drink from one just enough to satisfy a momentary thirst, and then go on to another. The better the human, as he would say in his vulgar way, the more he liked it. A fresh young girl, that was his favourite food the first of the evening. But the triumphant kill for Lestat was a young man. A young man around your age would have appealed to him in particular.
Me?
Daniel whispered. He had leaned forward on his elbows to peer into the vampire's eyes, and now he drew up.
Yes,
The vampire went on, as if he hadn't observed Daniel's change of expression.
you see, they represented the greatest loss to Lestat, because they stood on the threshold of the maximum possibility of life. Of course, Lestat didn't understand this himself. I came to understand it. Lestat understood nothing. I shall give you a perfect example of what Lestat liked. Up the river from us was the Frenier plantation, a magnificent spread of land which had great hopes of making a fortune in sugar, just shortly after the refining process had been invented. I presume you know sugar was refined in Louisiana. There is something perfect and ironic about it. This land which I loved producing refined sugar. I mean this more unhappily than I think you know. This refined sugar is a poison. It was like the essence of life in New Orleans, so sweet that it can be fatal, so richly enticing that all other values are forgotten. But as I was saying, upriver from us lived the Freniers, a great old French family which had produced in this generation 5 young women and 1 young man. Now, 3 of the young women were destined not to marry, but 2 were young enough still, and all depended upon the young man. He was to manage the plantation as I had done for my mother and sister. He was to negotiate marriages, to put together dowries when the entire fortune of the place rode precariously on the next year's sugar crop. He was to bargain, fight, and keep at a distance the entire material world for the world of Frenier. Lestat decided he wanted him, and when fate alone nearly cheated Lestat, he went wild. He risked his own life to get the Frenier boy, who had become involved in a duel. He had insulted a young Spanish Creole at a ball. The whole thing was nothing, really. But like most young Creoles, this one was willing to die for nothing. They were both willing to die for nothing. The Frenier household was in an uproar. You must understand, Lestat knew this perfectly. Both of us had hunted the Frenier plantation. Lestat for slaves and chicken thieves, and me for animals.
You were killing only animals?
Yes, but I'll come to that later, as I said. We both knew the plantation, and I had indulged in one of the greatest pleasures of a vampire, that of watching people unbeknownst to them. I knew the Frenier sisters, as I knew the magnificent rose trees around my brother's oratory. They were a unique group of women. Each in her own way was as smart as the brother, and one of them, I shall call her Babette, was not only as smart as her brother, but far wiser. Yet none had been educated to care for the plantation. None understood even the simplest facts about its financial state. All were totally dependent upon young Frenier, and all knew it. And so, larded with their love for him, their passionate belief that he hung the moon, and that any conjugal love they might ever know would only be a pale reflection of their love for him. Larded with this was a desperation as strong as the will to survive. If Frenier died in the duel, the plantation would collapse. Its fragile economy, a life of splendor based on the perennial mortgaging of the next year's crop, was in his hands alone. So you can imagine the panic and misery in the Frenier household the night that the son went to town to fight the appointed duel. And now picture Lestat, gnashing his teeth like a comic opera devil because he was not going to kill the young Frenier.
You mean, then, that you felt for the Frenier women?
I felt for them totally,
said the vampire.
Their position was agonizing, and I fell for the boy. That night he locked himself in his father's study and made a will. He knew full well that if he fell under the rapier at 4 a.m. the next morning, his family would fall with him. He deplored his situation and yet could do nothing to help it. To run out on the duel would not only mean social ruin for him, but would probably have been impossible. The other young man would have pursued him until he was forced to fight. When he left the plantation at midnight, he was staring into the face of death itself, with the character of a man who, having only one path to follow, has resolved to follow it with perfect courage. He would either kill the Spanish boy or die. It was unpredictable, despite all his skill. His face reflected a depth of feeling and wisdom I'd never seen on the face of any of Lestat's struggling victims. I had my first battle with Lestat then and there. I'd prevented him from killing the boy for months, and now he meant to kill him before the Spanish boy could. We were on horseback, racing after the young Frenier towards New Orleans. Lestat bent on overtaking him. I bent on overtaking Lestat. Well, the duel, as I told you, was scheduled for 4 a.m. on the edge of the swamp just beyond the city's northern gate. And arriving there just shortly before 4, we had precious little time to return to Pointe du Lac, which meant our own lives were in danger. I was incensed at Lestat as never before, and he was determined to get the boy, give him his chance. I was insisting, getting hold of Lestat before he could approach the boy. It was midwinter, bitter cold, and damp in the swamps. One volley of icy rain after another sweeping the clearing where the duel was to be fought. Of course, I did not fear these elements in the sense that you might. They did not numb me, nor threaten me with mortal shivering or illness. But vampires feel cold as acutely as humans, and the blood of the kill is often the rich, sensual alleviation of that cold. But what concerned me that morning was not the pain I felt, but the excellent cover of darkness these elements provided, which made Frenier extremely vulnerable to Lestat's attack. All he need do would be step away from his two friends towards the swamp, and Lestat might take him. And so I physically grappled with Lestat. I held him.
But towards all this, you had detachment, distance?
The vampire sighed.
Yes, I had it, and with it a supremely resolute anger. To glut himself upon the life of an entire family was to me Lestat's supreme act of utter contempt and disregard for all he should have seen with a vampire's depth. So I held him in the dark, where he spit at me and cursed at me. And young Frenier took his rapier from his friend and second, and went out on the slick, wet grass to meet his opponent. There was a brief conversation. Then the duel commenced. In moments, it was over. Frenier had mortally wounded the other boy with a swift thrust to the chest, and he knelt in the grass, bleeding, dying, shouting something unintelligible at Frenier. The victor simply stood there. Everyone could see there was no sweetness in the victory. Frenier looked on death as if it were an abomination. His companions advanced with their lanterns, urging him to come away as soon as possible and leave the dying man to his friends. Meantime, the wounded one would allow no one to touch him. And then, as Frenier's group turned to go, the three of them walking heavily towards their horses, the man on the ground drew a pistol. Perhaps I alone could see this in the powerful dark. But in any event, I shouted to Frenier as I ran towards the gun, and this was all that Lestat needed. while I was lost in my clumsiness, distracting Frenier and going for the gun itself. Lestat, with his years of experience and superior speed, grabbed the young man and spirited him into the cypresses. I doubt his friends even knew what had happened. The pistol had gone off, the wounded man had collapsed, and I was tearing through the near-frozen marshes, shouting for Lestat. Then I saw him. Frenier lay sprawled over the knobbed roots of a cypress, his boots deep in the murky water, and Lestat was still bent over him, one hand on the hand of Frenier that still held the foil. I went to pull Lestat off, and that right hand swung at me with such lightning speed I did not see it, did not know it had struck me until I found myself in the water also. And of course, by the time I recovered, Frenier was dead. I saw him as he lay there, his eyes closed, his lips utterly still, as if he were just sleeping. Damn you! I began cursing Lestat, and then I started, for the body of Frenier had begun to slip down into the marsh. The water rose over his face and covered him completely. Lestat was jubilant. He reminded me tersely that we had less than an hour to get back to Pointe du Lac, and he swore revenge on me.
If I didn't like the life of a southern planter, I'd finish you tonight. I know a way.
He threatened me.
I ought to drive your horse into the swamps. You'd have to dig yourself a hole and smother.
He rode off. Even over all these years, I feel that anger for him like a white-hot liquid filling my veins. I saw then what being a vampire meant to him.
He was just a killer.
Daniel said, his voice reflecting some of the vampire's emotion.
No regard for anything.
Number being a vampire for him meant revenge. Revenge against life itself. Every time he took a life, it was revenge. It was no wonder, then, that he appreciated nothing. The nuances of vampire existence weren't even available to him, because he was focused with a maniacal vengeance upon the mortal life he'd left. Consumed with hatred, he looked back. Consumed with envy, nothing pleased him unless he could take it from others. And once having it, he grew cold and dissatisfied, not loving the thing for itself. And so, went after something else. Vengeance, blind and sterile and contemptible. But I've spoken to you about the Frenier sisters. It was almost 5:30 when I reached their plantation. Dawn would come shortly after 6, but I was almost home. I slipped onto the upper gallery of their house and saw them all gathered in the parlor. They had never even dressed for bed. The candles burned low, and they sat already as mourners, waiting for the word. They were all dressed in black, as was their at-home custom, and in the dark, the black shapes of their dresses massed together with their raven hair, so that in the glow of the candles, their faces appeared as 5 soft, shimmering apparitions, each uniquely sad, each uniquely courageous. Babette's face alone appeared resolute. It was as if she had already made up her mind to take the burdens of Frenier if her brother died, and she had that same expression on her face now, which had been on her brother's when he mounted to leave for the duel. What lay ahead of her was nearly impossible. What lay ahead was the final death of which Lestat was guilty. So I did something then which caused me great risk. I made myself known to her. I did this by playing the light. As you can see, my face is very white and has a smooth, highly reflective surface, rather like that of polished marble.
Yes.
Daniel nodded and appeared flustered.
It's very beautiful, actually,
said Daniel.
I wonder if... But what happened?
You wonder if I was a handsome man when I was alive,
said the vampire. Daniel nodded.
I was. Nothing structurally has changed in me. Only I never knew that I was handsome. Life whirled about me a wind of petty concerns, as I've said. I gazed at nothing, not even a mirror, especially not a mirror, with a free eye. But this is what happened. I stepped near to the pane of glass and let the light touch my face. And this I did at a moment when Babette's eyes were turned towards the panes. Then I appropriately vanished. Within seconds, all the sisters knew a strange creature had been seen, a ghost-like creature, and the two slave maids steadfastly refused to investigate. I waited out these moments impatiently for just that which I wanted to happen. Babette finally took a candelabrum from a side table, lit the candles, and scorning everyone's fear, ventured out onto the cold gallery alone to see what was there. Her sisters hovering in the door like great black birds, one of them crying that the brother was dead and she had indeed seen his ghost. Of course, you must understand that Babette, being as strong as she was, never once attributed what she saw to imagination or to ghosts. I let her come the length of the dark gallery before I spoke to her, and even then I let her see only the vague outline of my body beside one of the columns. "Tell your sisters to go back," I whispered to her. "I come to tell you of your brother. Do as I say." She was still for an instant, and then she turned to me and strained to see me in the dark. "I have only a little time. I would not harm you for the world," I said, and she obeyed. Saying it was nothing, she told them to shut the door, and they obeyed as people obey, who not only need a leader but are desperate for one. Then I stepped into the light of Babette's candles.
Daniel's eyes were wide. He put his hand to his lips.
Did you look to her, as you do to me?
He asked.
"You asked that with such innocence,"
said the vampire.
"Yes, I suppose I certainly did. Only by candlelight I always had a less supernatural appearance, and I made no pretense with her of being an ordinary creature. I have only minutes," I told her at once, "but what I have to tell you is of the greatest importance. Your brother fought bravely and won the duel, but wait. You must know now, he's dead. Death was proverbial with him, the thief in the night about which all his goodness or courage could do nothing. But this is not the principal thing which I came to tell you. It is this: you can rule the plantation and you can save it. All that is required is that you let no one convince you otherwise. You must assume his position despite any outcry, any talk of convention, any talk of propriety or common sense. You must listen to nothing. The same land is here now that was here yesterday, morning when your brother slept above. Nothing is changed. You must take his place. If you do not, the land is lost and the family is lost. You will be 5 women on a small pension, doomed to live but half or less of what life could give you. Learn what you must know. Stop at nothing until you have the answers, and take my visitation to you to be your courage whenever you waver. You must take the reins of your own life. Your brother is dead." I could see by her face that she had heard every word. She would have questioned me had there been time, but she believed me when I said there was not. Then I used all my skill to leave her so swiftly I appeared to vanish. From the garden I saw her face above in the glow of her candles. I saw her search the dark for me, turning around and around, and then I saw her make the sign of the cross and walk back to her sisters within.
The vampire smiled.
There was absolutely no talk on the river coast of any strange apparition to Babette Frenier, but after the first morning and sad talk of the women left all alone, she became the scandal of the neighborhood because she chose to run the plantation on her own. She managed an immense dowry for her younger sister and was married herself in another year, and Lestat and I almost never exchanged words.
Did he go on living at Pointe du Lac?
Yes. I could not be certain he'd told me all I needed to know, and great pretense was necessary. My sister was married in my absence, for example, while I had armillerial chill. and something similar overcame me the morning of my mother's funeral. Meantime, Lestat and I sat down to dinner each night with the old man and made nice noises with our knives and forks, while he told us to eat everything on our plates and not to drink our wine too fast. With dozens of miserable headaches, I would receive my sister in a darkened bedroom, the covers up to my chin, bid her and her husband bear with the dim light on account of the pain in my eyes, as I entrusted to them large amounts of money to invest for us all. Fortunately, her husband was an idiot, a harmless one, but an idiot, the product of 4 generations of marriages between first cousins. But though these things went well, we began to have our problems with the slaves. They were the suspicious ones. And, as I've indicated, Lestat killed anyone and everyone he chose. So there was always some talk of mysterious death on the part of the coast. But it was what they saw of us which began the talk, and I heard it one evening when I was playing a shadow about the slave cabins. Now, let me explain first the character of these slaves. It was only about 1795, Lestat and I having lived there for 4 years in relative quiet, I investing the money which he acquired, increasing our lands, the purchasing of apartments and townhouses in New Orleans, which I rented, the work of the plantation itself producing little, more a cover for us than an investment. I say our. This is wrong. I never signed anything over to Lestat, and as you realize, I was still legally alive. But in 1795, these slaves did not have the character which you've seen in films and novels of the South. They were not soft-spoken, brown-skinned people in drab rags who spoke an English dialect. They were Africans, and they were islanders. That is, some of them had come from Santo Domingo. They were very black and totally foreign. They spoke in their African tongues, and they spoke the French patois. And when they sang African songs, which made the fields exotic and strange, always frightening to me in my mortal life. They were superstitious and had their own secrets and traditions. In short, they had not yet been destroyed as Africans completely. Slavery was the curse of their existence, but they had not been robbed yet of that which had been characteristically theirs. They tolerated the baptism and modest garments imposed on there by the French Catholic laws, but in the evenings they made their cheap fabrics into alluring costumes, made jewelry of animal bones and bits of discarded metal which they polished to look like gold. And the slave cabins of Pointe du Lac were a foreign country, an African coast after dark, in which not even the coldest overseer would want to wander. No fear for the vampire. Not until one summer evening when, passing for a shadow, I heard through the open doors of the black foreman's cottage a conversation which convinced me that Lestat and I slept is real danger. The slaves knew now we were not ordinary mortals. In hushed tones, the maids told of how, through a crack in the door, they had seen us dine on empty plates with empty silver, lifting empty glasses to our lips, laughing, our faces bleached and ghostly in the candlelight, the blind man a helpless fool in our power. Through keyholes, they had seen Lestat's coffin, and once he had beaten one of them mercilessly for dawdling by the gallery windows of his room. There is no bed in there, they confided one to the other with nodding heads. He sleeps in the coffin, I know it. They were convinced, on the best of grounds, of what we were. And as for me, they'd seen me evening after evening emerge from the oratory, which was now little more than a shapeless mass of brick and vine, layered with flowering wisteria in the spring, wild roses in summer, moss gleaming on the old unpainted shutters which had never been opened, spiders spinning in the stone arches. Of course I'd pretended to visit it in memory of Paul, but it was clear by their speech they no longer believed such lies. and now they attributed to us not only the deaths of slaves found in the fields and swamps, and also the dead cattle and occasional horses, but all other strange events. Even floods and thunder were the weapons of God in a personal battle waged with Louis and Lestat. But worse still, they were not planning to run away. Vice were devils, our power inescapable. No, we must be destroyed. And at this gathering, where I became an unseen member, were a number of the Frenier slaves. This meant word would get to the entire coast. And though I firmly believed the entire coast to be impervious to a wave of hysteria, I did not intend to risk notice of any kind. I hurried back to the plantation house to tell Lestat our game of playing planter was over. He'd have to give up his slave whip and golden napkin ring and move into town. He resisted naturally. His father was gravely ill and might not live. He had no intention of running away from stupid slaves.
"I'll kill them all," he said calmly, "in 3s and 4s. Some will run away, and that will be fine."
You're talking madness. The fact is, I want you gone from here.
"You want me gone? You—"
He sneered. He was building a card palace on the dining room table with a pack of very fine French cards.
"You whining coward of a vampire who prowls the night killing alley cats and rats and staring for hours at candles as if they were people, and standing in the rain like a zombie until your clothes are drenched and you smell like old wardrobe trunks in attics and have the look of a baffled idiot at the zoo."
You've nothing more to tell me, and your insistence on recklessness has endangered us both. I might live in that oratory alone while this house fell to ruin. I don't care about it, I told him, because this was quite true. But you must have all the things you never had of life and make of immortality a junk shop in which both of us become grotesque. Now, go look at your father and tell me how long he has to live. For that's how long you stay, and only if the slaves don't rise up against us. He told me then to go look at his father myself, since I was the one who was always looking. And I did. The old man was truly dying. I had been spared my mother's death, more or less, because she had died very suddenly on an afternoon. She'd been found with her sewing basket, seated quietly in the courtyard. She had died as one goes to sleep. But now I was seeing a natural death that was too slow with agony and with consciousness. And I'd always liked the old man. He was kindly and simple and made few demands. By day, he sat in the sun of the gallery dozing and listening to the birds. By night, any chatter on our part kept him company. He could play chess, carefully feeling each piece and remembering the entire state of the board with remarkable accuracy. And though Lestat would never play with him, I did often. Now he lay gasping for breath, his forehead hot and wet, the pillow around him stained with sweat. And as he moaned and prayed for death, Lestat in the other room began to play the spinet. I slammed it shut, barely missing his fingers. "You won't play while he dies," I said.
"The hell I won't,"
he answered me.
"I'll play the drum if I like."
And taking a great sterling silver platter from a sideboard, he slipped a finger through one of its handles and beat it with a spoon. I told him to stop it, or I would make him stop it. And then we both ceased our noise because the old man was calling his name. He was saying that he must talk to Lestat now before he died. I told Lestat to go to him. The sound of his crying was terrible.
"Why should I? I've cared for him all these years. Isn't that enough?"
And he drew from his pocket a nail file, and seating himself on the foot of the old man's bed, he began to file his long nails. Meantime, I should tell you that I was aware of slaves about the house. They were watching and listening. I was truly hoping the old man would die within minutes. Once or twice before I dealt with suspicion or doubt on the part of several slaves. but never such a number. I immediately rang for the boy, the slave to whom I'd given the overseer's house and position. But while I waited for him, I could hear the old man talking to Lestat. Lestat, who sat with his legs crossed, filing and filing, one eyebrow arched, his attention on his perfect nails.
It was the school,
The old man was saying.
Oh, I know you remember. What can I say to you?
He moaned.
You'd better say it,
Lestat said.
because you're about to die.
The old man let out a terrible noise, and I suspect I made some sound of my own. I positively loathed Lestat. I had a mind now to get him out of the room.
Well, you know that, don't you? Even a fool like you knows that,
Said Lestat.
You'll never forgive me, will you? Not now, not even after I'm dead.
Said the old man.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Said Lestat. My patience was becoming exhausted with him, and the old man was becoming more and more agitated. He was begging Lestat to listen to him with a warm heart. The whole thing was making me shudder. Meantime, Daniel had come, and I knew the moment I saw him that everything at Pointe du Lac was lost. Had I been more attentive, I'd have seen signs of it before now. He looked at me with eyes of glass. I was a monster to him. Monsieur Lestat's father is very ill. Going, I said, ignoring his expression. I want no noise tonight. The slaves must all stay within the cabins. A doctor is on his way. He stared at me as if I were lying. And then his eyes moved curiously and coldly away from me towards the old man's door. His face underwent such a change that I rose at once and looked in the room. It was Lestat, slouched at the foot of the bed, his back to the bedpost, his nail file working furiously, grimacing in such a way that both his great teeth showed prominently.
The vampire stopped, his shoulders shaking with silent laughter. He was looking at Daniel, and Daniel looked shyly at the table. But he had already looked and fixedly at the vampire's mouth. He had seen that the lips were of a different texture from the vampire's skin, that they were silken and delicately lined like any person's lips, only deadly white. And he had glimpsed the white teeth. Only the vampire had such a way of smiling that they were not completely revealed, and Daniel had not even thought of such teeth until now.
You can imagine,
Said the vampire.
what this meant. I had to kill him.
You what?
Said Daniel.
I had to kill him. He started to run. He would have alarmed everyone. Perhaps it might have been handled some other way, but I had no time. So I went after him, overpowering him. But then, finding myself in the act of doing what I had not done for 4 years, I stopped. This was a man. He had his bone-handle knife in his hand to defend himself, and I took it from him easily and slipped it into his heart. He sank to his knees at once, his fingers tightening on the blade, bleeding on it, and the sight of the blood, the aroma of it, maddened me. I believe I moaned aloud, but I did not reach for him. I would not. Then I remember seeing Lestat's figure emerge in the mirror over the sideboard.
Why did you do this?
He demanded. I turned to face him, determined he would not see me in this weakened state. The old man was delirious, he went on. He could not understand what the old man was saying. The slaves, they know. You must go to the cabins and keep watch, I managed to say to him. I'll care for the old man.
Kill him.
Lestat said. Are you mad? I answered. He's your father,
I know he's my father.
said Lestat.
That's why you have to kill him. I can't kill him. If I could, I would have done it a long time ago, damn him.
He wrung his hands.
We've got to get out of here. And look what you've done, killing this one. There's no time to lose. His wife will be wailing up here in minutes. Or she'll send someone worse.
The vampire sighed.
This was all true. Lestat was right. I could hear the slaves gathering around the boy's cottage, waiting for him. Daniel had been brave enough to come into the haunted house alone. When he didn't return, the slaves would panic, become a mob. I told Lestat to calm them, to use all his power as a white master over them and not to alarm them with horror. And then I went into the bedroom and shut the door. I had then another shock in a night of shocks, because I'd never seen Lestat's father as he was then. He was sitting up now, leaning forward, talking to Lestat, begging Lestat to answer him, telling him he understood his bitterness better than Lestat did himself. And he was a living corpse. Nothing animated his sunken body but a fierce will. Hence, his eyes for their gleam were all the more sunken in his skull, and his lips in their trembling made his old yellowed mouth more horrible. I sat at the foot of the bed, and suffering to see him so, I gave him my hand. I cannot tell you how much his appearance had shaken me, for when I bring death, it is swift and conscienceless, leaving the victim as if in enchanted sleep. But this was the slow decay, the body refusing to surrender to the vampire of time which had sucked upon it for years on end.
Lestat,
he said.
just for once, don't be hard with me. Just for once, be, for me, the boy you were, my son.
He said this over and over, the words,
My son, my son.
and then he said something I could not hear about innocence, and innocence destroyed. But I could see that he was not out of his mind, as Lestat thought, but in some terrible state of lucidity. The burden of the past was on him with full force, and the present, which was only death, which he fought with all his will, could do nothing to soften that burden. But I knew I might deceive him if I used all my skill, and bending close to him now, I whispered the word, Father. It was not Lestat's voice, it was mine, a soft whisper, but he calmed at once, and I thought then he might die. But he held my hand, as if he were being pulled under by dark ocean waves, and I alone could save him. He talked now of some country teacher, a name garbled, who found in Lestat a brilliant pupil and begged to take him to a monastery for an education. He cursed himself for bringing Lestat home, for burning his books.
You must forgive me, Lestat,
he cried. I pressed his hand tightly, hoping this might do for some answer, but he repeated this again.
You have it all to live for, but you are as cold and brutal as I was then, with the work always there, and the cold and hunger. Lestat, you must remember, you were the gentlest of them all. God will forgive me if you forgive me.
Well, at that moment, the real Lestat came through the door. I gestured for quiet, but he wouldn't see that, so I had to get up quickly so the father wouldn't hear his voice from a distance. The slaves had run from him.
But they're out there. They're gathered in the dark. I hear them,
said Lestat. And then he glared at the old man.
Kill him, Louis,
he said to me, his voice touched with the first pleading I'd ever heard in it. Then he bit down in rage.
Do it!
Lean over that pillow and tell him you forgive him all. Forgive him for taking you out of school when you were a boy. Tell him that now.
For what?
Lestat grimaced, so that his face looked like a skull.
Taking me out of school.
He threw up his hands and let out a terrible roar of desperation.
Damn him! Kill him!
He said. No, I said. You forgive him. Or you kill him yourself. Go on. Kill your own father. The old man begged to be told what we were saying. He called out,
Son, son.
And Lestat danced like the maddened Rumpelstiltskin, about to put his foot through the moor. I went to the lace curtains. I could see and hear the slaves surrounding the house of Pointe de Lac, forms woven in the shadows, drawing near.
You were Joseph among your brothers,
the old man said.
the best of them. But how was I to know? It was when you were gone I knew, when all those years passed, and they could offer me no comfort, no solace. And then you came back to me and took me from the farm. But it wasn't you. It wasn't the same boy.
I turned on Lestat now and veritably dragged him towards the bed. Never had I seen him so weak, and at the same time enraged. He shook me off and then knelt down near the pillow, glowering at me. I stood resolute and whispered, "Forgive."
It's all right, Father. You must rest easy. I hold nothing against you,
he said, his voice thin and strained over his anger. The old man turned on the pillow, murmuring something soft with relief, but Lestat was already gone. He stopped short in the doorway, his hands over his ears.
They're coming,
he whispered. And then turning just so he could see me, he said,
Take him, for God's sake.
The old man never even knew what happened. He never awoke from his stupor. I bled him just enough, opening the gash so he would then die without feeding my dark passion. That thought I couldn't bear. I knew now it wouldn't matter if the body was found in this manner, because I had had enough of Pointe du Lac and Lestat, and all this identity of Pointe du Lac's prosperous master. I would torch the house and turn to the wealth I'd held under many names, safe for just such a moment. Meantime, Lestat was after the slaves. He would leave such ruin and death behind him, no one could make a story of that night at Pointe du Lac. And I went with him. As before, his ferocity was mysterious, but now I bared my fangs on the humans who fled from me, my steady advance overcoming their clumsy, pathetic speed, as the veil of death descended, or the veil of madness. The power and the proof of the vampire was incontestable, so that the slaves scattered in all directions, and it was I who ran back up the steps to put the torch to Pointe du Lac. Lestat came bounding after me.
What are you doing?
He shouted.
Are you mad?
But there was no way to put out the flames.
They're gone, and you're destroying it. All of it.
He turned round and round in the magnificent parlour, amid his fragile splendour. Get your coffin out. You have 3 hours till dawn, I said. The house was a funeral pyre.
Could the fire have hurt you?
Asked Daniel.
Most definitely,
Said the vampire.
Did you go back to the oratory? Was it safe?
Number not at all. Some 55 slaves were scattered around the grounds. Many of them would not have desired the life of a runaway, and would most certainly go right to Frenier or south to the Beljardin plantation downriver. I had no intention of staying there that night, but there was little time to go anywhere else.
The woman Babette?
Said Daniel. The vampire smiled.
Yes, I went to Babette. She lived now at Frenier with her young husband. I had enough time to load my coffin into the carriage and go to her.
But what about Lestat?
The vampire sighed.
Lestat went with me. It was his intention to go on to New Orleans, and he was trying to persuade me to do just that. But when he saw I meant to hide at Frenier, he opted for that also. We might not have ever made it to New Orleans. It was growing light, not so that mortal eyes would have seen it, but Lestat and I could see it. Now, as for Babette, I had visited her once again. As I told you, she had scandalized the coast by remaining alone on the plantation, without a man in the house, without even an older woman. Babette's greatest problem was that she might succeed financially, only to suffer the isolation of social ostracism. She had such a sensibility that wealth itself meant nothing to her. Family, a line. This meant something to Babette. Though she was able to hold the plantation together, the scandal was wearing on her. She was giving up inside. I came to her one night in the garden, not permitting her to look on me, I told her in a most gentle voice that I was the same person she'd seen before, that I knew of her life and her suffering. Don't expect people to understand it, I told her. They are fools. They want you to retire because of your brother's death. They would use your life as if it were merely oil for a proper lamp. You must defy them, but you must defy them with purity and confidence. She was listening all the while in silence. I told her she was to give a ball for a cause, and the cause to be religious. She might pick a convent in New Orleans, anyone, and plan for a philanthropic ball. She would invite her deceased mother's dearest friends to be chaperones, and she would do all of this with perfect confidence. Above all, perfect confidence. It was confidence and purity which were all important.
Well, Babette thought this to be a stroke of genius.
I don't know what you are, and you will not tell me.
She said. This was true. I would not.
But I can only think that you are an angel.
And she begged to see my face. That is, she begged in the manner of such people as Babette, who are not given to truly begging anyone for anything. Not that Babette was proud. She was simply strong and honest, which in most cases makes begging. I see you want to ask me a question. The vampire stopped.
Oh no,
said Daniel, who had meant to hide it.
But you mustn't be afraid to ask me anything, if I held something too close.
And when the vampire said this, his face darkened for an instant. He frowned, and as his brows drew together, a small well appeared in the flesh of his forehead over his left brow, as though someone had pressed it with a finger. It gave him a peculiar look of deep distress.
If I held something too close for you to ask about it, I would not bring it up in the first place,
he said. Daniel found himself staring at the vampire's eyes, at the eyelashes which were fine black wires in the tender flesh of the lids.
Ask me,
he said to Daniel.
Babette, the way you speak of her,
said Daniel.
as if your feeling was special.
Did I give you the impression I could not feel?
Asked the vampire.
No, not at all. Obviously you felt for the old man. You stayed to comfort him when you were in danger, and what you felt for young Frenier when Lestat wanted to kill him. All this you explained. But I was wondering, did you have a special feeling for Babette? Was it feeling for Babette all along that caused you to protect Frenier?
You mean love,
said the vampire.
Why do you hesitate to say it?
Because you spoke of detachment,
said Daniel.
Do you think that angels are detached?
Asked the vampire. Daniel thought for a moment.
Yes,
he said.
But aren't angels capable of love?
Asked the vampire.
Don't angels gaze upon the face of God with complete love?
Daniel thought for a moment.
Love or adoration,
he said.
What is the difference?
Asked the vampire thoughtfully.
What is the difference?
It was clearly not a riddle for Daniel. He was asking himself.
Angels feel love and pride, the pride of the fall and hatred, the strong, overpowering emotions of detached persons in whom emotion and will are one,
he said finally. He stared at the table now, as though he were thinking this over, was not entirely satisfied with it.
I had for Babette a strong feeling. It is not the strongest I've ever known for a human being.
He looked up at Daniel.
But it was very strong. Babette was to me, in her own way, an ideal human being.
He shifted in his chair, the cape moving softly about him, and turned his face to the windows. Daniel bent forward and checked the tape. Then he took another cassette from his briefcase and, begging the vampire's pardon, fitted it into place.
I'm afraid I did ask something too personal. I didn't mean,
he said anxiously to the vampire.
You asked nothing of the sort,
said the vampire, looking at him suddenly.
It is a question right to the point. I feel love, and I felt some measure of love for Babette, though not the greatest love I've ever felt. It was foreshadowed in Babette. To return to my story, Babette's charity ball was a success, and her re-entry in social life assured by it. Her money generously underwrote any doubts in the minds of her suitors' families, and she married. On summer nights, I used to visit her, never letting her see me or know that I was there. I came to see that she was happy, and seeing her happy, I felt a happiness as the result. And to Babette I came now with Lestat. He would have killed the Freniers long ago if I hadn't stopped him, and he thought now that was what I meant to do. And what peace would that bring? I asked. You call me the idiot, and you've been the idiot all along. Do you think I don't know why you made me a vampire? You couldn't live by yourself. You couldn't manage even the simplest things. For years now, I've managed everything while you sat about making a pretense of superiority. There's nothing left for you to tell me about life. I have no need of you, and no use for you. It's you who need me. And if you touch but one of the Frenier slaves, I'll get rid of you. It will be a battle between us, and I needn't point out to you, I have more wit to fare better in my little finger than you in your entire frame. Do as I say. Well, this startled him, though it shouldn't have. And he protested he had much to tell me, of things and types of people I might kill, who would cause sudden death, and places in the world I must never go, and so forth and so on. Nonsense that I could hardly endure. But I had no time for him. The overseer's lights were lit at Frenier. He was trying to quell the excitement of the runaway slaves and his own, and the fire of Pointe de Lac could be seen still against the sky. Babette was dressed and attending to business, having sent carriages to Pointe de Lac and slaves to help fight the blaze. The frightened runaways were kept away from the others, and at that point no one regarded their stories as any more than slave foolishness. Babette knew something dreadful had happened and suspected murder, never the supernatural. She was in the study making a note of the fire in the plantation diary when I found her. It was almost morning. I had only a few minutes to convince her she must help. I spoke to her at first, refusing to let her turn around, and calmly she listened. I told her I must have a room for the night to rest. I've never brought you harm. I ask you now for a key, and your promise that no one will try to enter that room until tonight. Then I'll tell you all. I was nearly desperate now. The sky was paling. Lestat was yards off in the orchard with the coffins.
But why have you come to me tonight?
She asked. And why not to you? I replied. Did I not help you at the very moment when you most needed guidance? When you alone stood strong among those who are dependent and weak? Did I not twice offer you good counsel? And haven't I watched over your happiness ever since? I could see the figure of Lestat at the window. He was in a panic. Give me the key to a room. Let no one come near it till nightfall. I swear to you, I would never bring you harm.
And if I don't? If I believe you come from the devil?
She said now, and meant to turn her head. I reached for the candle and put it out. She saw me standing with my back to the greying windows. If you don't, and if you believe me to be the devil, I shall die, I said. Give me the key. I could kill you now if I chose. Do you see? And now I moved close to her and showed myself to her more completely, so that she gasped and drew back, holding to the arm of her chair. But I would not. I would die rather than kill you. I will die if you don't give me such a key as I ask. It was accomplished. What she thought, I don't know. But she gave me one of the ground floor storage rooms where wine was aged, and I am sure she saw Lestat and me bringing the coffins. I not only locked the door but barricaded it. Lestat was up the next evening when I awoke.
Then she kept her word.
Yes, only she had gone a step further. She had not only respected our locked door, She had locked it again from without.
And the stories of the slaves, she'd heard them.
Yes, she had. Lestat was the first to discover we were locked in, however. He became furious. He had planned to get to New Orleans as fast as possible. He was now completely suspicious of me.
I only needed you as long as my father lived,
he said, desperately trying to find some opening somewhere. The place was a dungeon.
Now I won't put up with anything from you. I warn you.
He didn't even wish to turn his back on me. I sat there straining to hear voices in the rooms above, wishing that he would shut up, not wishing to confide for a moment my feeling for Babette or my hopes. I was also thinking something else. You asked me about feeling and detachment. One of its aspects, detachment with feeling I should say, is that you can think of two things at the same time. You can think that you are not safe and may die, and you can think of something very abstract and remote. And this was definitely so with me. I was thinking at that moment, wordlessly and rather deeply, how sublime friendship between Lestat and me might have been, how few impediments to it there would have been, and how much to be shared. Perhaps it was the closeness of Babette which caused me to feel it, for how could I truly ever come to know Babette, except, of course, through the one final way, to take her life, to become one with her in an embrace of death, when my soul would become one with my heart and nourished with it. But my soul wanted to know Babette without my need to kill, without robbing her of every breath of life, every drop of blood. But Lestat, how we might have known each other, had he been a man of character, a man of even a little thought. The old man's words came back to me. Lestat, a brilliant pupil, a lover of books that had been burned. I knew only the Lestat who sneered at my library, called it a pile of dust, ridiculed relentlessly my reading, my meditations. I became aware now that the house over our heads was quieting. Now and then feet moved, and the boards creaked, and the light in the cracks of the boards gave a faint, uneven illumination. I could see Lestat feeling along the brick walls, his hard, enduring vampire face a twisted mask of human frustration. I was confident we must part ways at once, that I must, if necessary, put an ocean between us. And I realized that I'd tolerated him this long because of self-doubt. I'd fooled myself into believing I stayed for the old man, and for my sister and her husband. But I stayed with Lestat because I was afraid he did know essential secrets as a vampire which I could not discover alone, and more important, because he was the only one of my kind whom I knew. He had never told me how he had become a vampire or where I might find a single other member of our kind. This troubled me greatly then, as much as it had for 4 years. I hated and wanted to leave him. Yet could I leave him? Meantime, as all this passed through my thoughts, Lestat continued his diatribe. He didn't need me. He wasn't going to put up with anything, especially not any threat from the Freniers. We had to be ready when that door opened.
Remember,
he said finally,
speed and strength, they cannot match us in that. And fear. Remember always to strike fear. Don't be sentimental now. You'll cost us everything.
You wish to be on your own after this? I asked him. I wanted him to say it. I did not have the courage. Or rather, I did not know my own feelings.
I want to get to New Orleans,
he said.
I was simply warning you I don't need you. But to get out of here, we need each other. You don't begin to know how to use your powers. You have no innate sense of what you are. Use your persuasive powers with this woman, if she comes. But if she comes with others, then be prepared to act like what you are.
Which is what? I asked him, because it had never seemed such a mystery to me as it did at that time. What am I? He was openly disgusted. He threw up his hands.
Be prepared.
He said, now baring his magnificent teeth.
To kill.
He looked suddenly at the boards overhead.
They're going to bed up there. Do you hear them?
After a long silent time during which Lestat paced, and I sat there musing, plumbing my mind for what I might do or say to Babette, or, deeper still, for the answer to a harder question, what did I feel for Babette? After a long time, a light flared beneath the door. Lestat was poised to jump whoever should open it. It was Babette alone, and she entered with a lamp, not seeing Lestat, who stood behind her, but looking directly at me. I had never seen her as she looked then. Her hair was down for bed, a mass of dark waves behind her white dressing gown, and her face was tight with worry and fear. This gave it a feverish radiance and made her large brown eyes all the more huge. As I have told you, I loved her strength and honesty, the greatness of her soul, and I did not feel passion for her as you would feel it, but I found her more alluring than any woman I'd known in mortal life. Even in the severe dressing gown, her arms and breasts were round and soft, and she seemed to me an intriguing soul clothed in rich, mysterious flesh. I, who am hard and spare and dedicated to a purpose, felt drawn to her irresistibly, and knowing it could only culminate in death, I turned away from her at once, wondering if when she gazed into my eyes she found them dead and soulless.
You are the one who came to me before.
She said now, as if she hadn't been sure.
And you are the owner of Pointe du Lac. You Argyll.
I knew as she spoke that she must have heard the wildest stories of last night, and there would be no convincing her of any lie. I had used my unnatural appearance twice to reach her, to speak to her. I could not hide it or minimize it now. I mean you no harm, I said to her. I need only a carriage and horses, the horses I left last night in the pasture. She didn't seem to hear my words. She drew closer, determined to catch me in the circle of her light. And then I saw Lestat behind her, his shadow merging with her shadow on the brick wall. He was anxious and dangerous. You will give me the carriage? I insisted. She was looking at me now, the lamp raised. And just when I meant to look away, I saw her face change. It went still, blank, as if her soul were losing its consciousness. She closed her eyes and shook her head. It occurred to me that I had somehow caused her to go into a trance without any effort on my part.
What are you?
She whispered.
You're from the devil. You were from the devil when you came to me.
The devil, I answered her. This distressed me more than I thought I could be distressed. If she believed this, then she would think my counsel bad. She would question herself. Her life was rich and good, and I knew she mustn't do this. Like all strong people, she suffered always a measure of loneliness. She was a marginal outsider, a secret infidel of a certain sort, and the balance by which she lived might be upset if she were to question her own goodness. She stared at me with undisguised horror. It was as if in horror she forgot her own vulnerable position. And now Lestat, who was drawn to weakness like a parched man to water, grabbed her wrist, and she screamed and dropped the lamp. The flames leaped in the splattered oil, and Lestat pulled her backwards towards the open door.
You get the carriage,
he said to her.
Get it now, and the horses. You are in mortal danger. Don't talk of devils.
I stomped on the flames and went for Lestat, shouting at him to leave her. He had her by both wrists, and she was furious.
You'll rouse the house if you don't shut up,
he said to me.
And I'll kill her. Get the carriage. Lead us. Talk to the stable boy,
he said to her, pushing her into the open air. We moved slowly across the dark court, my distress almost unbearable. Lestat ahead of me, and before us both Babette, who moved backwards, her eyes peering at us in the dark. Suddenly she stopped. One dim light burned in the house above.
I'll get you nothing,
she said. I reached for Lestat's arm and told him I must handle this. She'll reveal us to everyone unless you let me talk to her, I whispered to him.
Then get yourself in check,
he said disgustedly.
Be strong. Don't quibble with her.
You go as I talk. Go to the stables and get the carriage and the horses, but don't kill. Whether he'd obey me or not, I didn't know, but he darted away just as I stepped up to Babette. Her face was a mixture of fury and resolution. She said,
Get thee behind me, Satan.
And I stood there before her then, speechless, just holding her in my glance as surely as she held me. If she could hear Lestat in the night, she gave no indication. Her hatred for me burned me like fire. Why do you say this to me? I asked. Was the counsel I gave you bad? Did I do you harm? I came to help you, to give you strength. I thought only of you, when I had no need to think of you at all. She shook her head.
But why? Why do you talk to me like this?
She asked.
I know what you've done at Pointe du Lac. You've lived there like a devil. The slaves are wild with stories. All day men have been on the river road on the way to Pointe du Lac. My husband was there. He saw the house in ruins, the bodies of slaves throughout the orchards, the fields. What are you? Why do you speak to me gently? What do you want of me?
She clung now to the pillars of the porch and was backing slowly to the staircase. Something moved above in the lighted window. I cannot give you such answers now, I said to her. Believe me when I tell you I came to you only to do you good, and would not have brought worry and care to you last night for anything, had I the choice. The vampire stopped.
Daniel sat forward, his eyes wide. The vampire was frozen, staring off, lost in his thoughts, his memory. And Daniel looked down suddenly, as if this were the respectful thing to do. He glanced again at the vampire, and then away, his own face as distressed as the vampire's, and then he started to say something, but he stopped. The vampire turned towards him and studied him, so that Daniel flushed and looked away again anxiously. But then he raised his eyes and looked into the vampire's eyes. He swallowed, but he held the vampire's gaze. "Is this what you want?" The vampire whispered.
Is this what you wanted to hear?
He moved the chair back soundlessly and walked to the window. Daniel sat as if stunned, looking at his broad shoulders and the long mass of the cape. The vampire turned his head slightly.
You don't answer me. I'm not giving you what you want, am I? You wanted an interview, something to broadcast on the radio.
That doesn't matter. I'll throw the tapes away if you want.
Daniel rose.
I can't say I understand all you're telling me. You'd know I was lying if I said I did. So how can I ask you to go on, except to say what I do understand? What I do understand is like nothing I've ever understood before.
He took a step towards the vampire. The vampire appeared to be looking down into Divisadero Street. Then he turned his head slowly and looked at Daniel and smiled. His face was serene and almost affectionate. And Daniel suddenly felt uncomfortable. He shoved his hands into his pockets and turned towards the table. Then he looked at the vampire tentatively and said,
Will you please go on?
The vampire turned with folded arms and leaned against the window.
Why?
He asked. Daniel was at a loss.
Because I want to hear it.
He shrugged.
Because I want to know what happened.
All right,
said the vampire, with the same smile playing on his lips. And he went back to the chair and sat opposite Daniel and turned the recorder just a little and said,
Marvelous contraption, really. So let me go on. You must understand that what I felt for Babette now was a desire for communication, stronger than any other desire I then felt, except for the physical desire for blood. It was so strong in me, this desire, that it made me feel the depth of my capacity for loneliness. When I'd spoken to her before, there had been a brief but direct communication, which was as simple and as satisfying as taking a person's hand, clasping it, letting it go gently, all this in a moment of great need and distress. But now we were at odds. To Babette, I was a monster, and I found it horrible to myself, and would have done anything to overcome her feeling. I told her the counsel I'd given her was right, that no instrument of the devil could do right even if he chose.
I know,
She answered me, but by this she meant that she could no more trust me than the devil himself. I approached her, and she moved back. I raised my hand and she shrank, clutching for the railing. "All right then," I said, feeling a terrible exasperation. "Why did you protect me last night? Why have you come to me alone?" What I saw in her face was cunning. She had a reason, but she would by no means reveal it to me. It was impossible for her to speak to me freely, openly, to give me the communication I desired. I felt weary looking at her. The night was already late, and I could see and hear that Lestat had stolen into the wine cellar and taken our caskets, and I had a need to get away, and other needs besides, the need to kill and drink. But it wasn't that which made me weary. It was something else, something far worse. It was as if this night were only one of thousands of nights, world without end, night curving into night to make a great arching line of which I couldn't see the end, a night in which I roamed alone under cold, mindless stars. I think I turned away from her and put my hand to my eyes. I felt oppressed and weak suddenly. I think I was making some sound without my will. And then, on this vast and desolate landscape of night, where I was standing alone, and where Babette was only an illusion, I saw suddenly a possibility that I'd never considered before, a possibility from which I'd fled, wrapped as I was with the world, fallen into the senses of the vampire, in love with colour and shape and sound and singing and softness and infinite variation. Babette was moving, but I took no note of it. She was taking something from her pocket. Her great ring of household keys jingled there. She was moving up the steps. Let her go away, I was thinking. "Creature of the devil," I whispered. "Get thee behind me, Satan," I repeated. I turned to look at her now. She was frozen on the steps, with wide, suspicious eyes. She'd reached the lantern which hung on the wall, and she held it in her hands, just staring at me, holding it tight, like a valuable purse. "You think I come from the devil?" I asked her. She quickly moved her left fingers around the hook of the lantern, and with her right hand made the sign of the cross, the Latin words barely audible to me. And her face blanched, and her eyebrows rose when there was absolutely no change because of it. "Did you expect me to go up in a puff of smoke?" I asked her. I drew closer now, for I had gained detachment from her by virtue of my thoughts. "And where would I go?" I asked her. "And where would I go to hell from whence I came, to the devil from whom I came?" I stood at the foot of the steps. Suppose I told you I know nothing of the devil. Suppose I told you that I do not even know if he exists. It was the devil I'd seen upon the landscape of my thoughts. It was the devil about whom I thought now. I turned away from her. She wasn't hearing me as you are now. She wasn't listening. I looked up at the stars. Lestat was ready. I knew it. It was as if he'd been ready there with the carriage for years, and she had stood upon the step for years. I had the sudden sensation my brother was there, and had been there for ages also, and that he was talking to me low in an excited voice, and what he was saying was desperately important, but it was going away from me as fast as he said it, like the rustle of rats in the rafters of an immense house. There was a scraping sound and a burst of light. I don't know whether I come from the devil or not. I don't know what I am, I shouted at Babette, my voice deafening in my own sensitive ears. I am to live to the end of the world, and I do not even know what I am. But the light flared before me. It was the lantern which she had lit with a match and held now so I couldn't see her face. For a moment I could see nothing but the light, and then the great weight of the lantern struck me full force in the chest, and the glass shattered on the bricks, and the flames roared on my legs, in my face. Lestat was shouting from the darkness,
Put it out, idiot! It will consume you!
And I felt something thrashing me wildly in my blindness. It was Lestat's jacket. I'd fallen helpless back against the pillar, helpless as much from the fire and the blow as from the knowledge that Babette meant to destroy me, as from the knowledge that I did not know what I was. All this happened in a matter of seconds. The fire was out, and I knelt in the dark with my hands on the bricks. Lestat, at the top of the stairs, had Babette again, and I flew up after him, grabbing him about the neck and pulling him backwards. He turned on me, enraged, and kicked me, but I clung to him and pulled him down on top of me to the bottom. Babette was petrified. I saw her dark outline against the sky and the glint of light in her eyes.
Come on, then,
Lestat said, scrambling to his feet. Babette was putting her hand to her throat. My injured eyes strained to gather the light to see her. Her throat bled. Remember, I said to her, I might have killed you, or let him kill you. I did not. You called me devil. You are wrong.
Then you'd stopped Lestat just in time,
said Daniel.
Yes, Lestat could kill and dank like a bolt of lightning, but I had saved only Babette's physical life. I was not to know that until later. In an hour and a half, Lestat and I were in New Orleans, the horses nearly dead from exhaustion, the carriage parked on a side street a block from a new Spanish hotel. Lestat had an old man by the arm and was putting $50 into his hand.
Get us a suite,
He directed him.
and order some champagne. Say it is for 2 gentlemen, and pay in advance. And when you come back, I'll have another 50 for you, and I'll be watching for you, I wager.
His gleaming eyes held the man in thrall. I knew he'd kill him as soon as he returned with the hotel room keys, and he did. I sat in the carriage, watching wearily, as the man grew weaker and weaker and finally died, his body collapsing like a sack of rocks in a doorway as Lestat let him go.
Good night, sweet prince,
Said Lestat,
and here's your $50.
and he shoved the money into his pocket as if it were a capital joke. Now we slipped in the courtyard doors of the hotel and went up to the lavish parlour of our suite. Champagne glistened in a frosted bucket. 2 glasses stood on the silver tray. I knew Lestat would fill 1 glass and sit there staring at the pale yellow colour, and I, a man in a trance, lay on the settee staring at him as if nothing he could do mattered. I have to leave him or die, I thought. It would be sweet to die, I thought. Yes, die. I wanted to die before. Now I wish to die. I saw it with such sweet clarity, such dead calm.
You're being morbid.
Lestat said suddenly.
It's almost dawn.
He pulled the lace curtains back, and I could see the rooftops under the dark blue sky, and above the great constellation Orion.
Go kill!
Said Lestat, sliding up the glass. He stepped out of the sill, and I heard his feet land softly on the rooftop beside the hotel. He was going for the coffins, or at least one. My thirst rose in me like fever, and I followed him. My desire to die was constant, like a pure thought in the mind, devoid of emotion. Yet I needed to feed. I've indicated to you I would not then kill people. I moved along the rooftop in search of rats.
But why? You've said Lestat shouldn't have made you start with people. Do you mean for you it was an aesthetic choice, not a moral one?
Had you asked me then, I would have told you it was aesthetic, that I wished to understand death in stages, that the death of an animal yielded such pleasure and experience to me that I had only begun to understand it, and wished to save the experience of human death for my mature understanding. But it was moral, because all aesthetic decisions are moral, really.
I don't understand,
said Daniel.
I thought aesthetic decisions could be completely immoral. What about the cliché of the artist who leaves his wife and children so he can paint? Or Nero playing the harp while Rome burned?
Both were moral decisions. Both served a higher good, in the mind of the artist. The conflict lies between the morals of the artist and the morals of society, not between aesthetics and morality. But often this isn't understood, and here comes the waste, the tragedy. An artist, stealing paints from a store, for example, imagines himself to have made an inevitable but immoral decision, and then he sees himself as fallen from grace. What follows is despair and petty irresponsibility, as if morality were a great glass world which can be utterly shattered by one act. But this was not my great concern then. I did not know these things then. I believed I killed animals for aesthetic reasons only, and I hedged against the great moral question of whether or not by my very nature I was damned. Because you see, though Lestat had never said anything about devils or hell to me, I believed I was damned when I went over to him, just as Judas must have believed it when he put the noose around his neck. You understand?
Daniel said nothing. He started to speak, but didn't. The color burned for a moment in blotches on his cheeks.
Were you?
He whispered. The vampire only sat there, smiling, a small smile that played on his lips like the light. Daniel was staring at him now, as if he were just seeing him for the first time.
Perhaps,
said the vampire, drawing himself up and crossing his legs.
We should take things one at a time. Perhaps I should go on with my story.
Yes, please,
said Daniel.
I was agitated that night, as I told you. I had hedged against this question as a vampire, and now it completely overwhelmed me, and in that state I had no desire to live. Well, this produced in me, as it can in humans, a craving for that which will satisfy at least physical desire. I think I used it as an excuse. I have told you what the kill means to vampires. You can imagine from what I have said the difference between a rat and a man. I went down into the street after Lestat and walked for blocks. The streets were muddy then, the actual blocks islands above the gutters, and the entire city so dark compared to the cities of today. The lights were as beacons in a black sea. Even with morning rising slowly, only the dormers and high porches of the houses were emerging from the dark, and to a mortal man, the narrow streets I found were like pitch. Am I damned? Am I from the devil? Is my very nature that of a devil? I was asking myself over and over, and if it is, why then do I revolt against it? Tremble when Babette hurls a flaming lantern at me, turn away in disgust when Lestat kills. What have I become in becoming a vampire? Where am I to go? And all the while, as the death wish caused me to neglect my thirst grew hotter. My veins were veritable threads of pain in my flesh. My temples throbbed, and finally I could stand it no longer. Torn apart by the wish to take no action to starve, to wither in thought on the one hand, and driven to kill on the other, I stood in an empty, desolate street and heard the sound of a child crying. She was within. I drew close to the walls, trying in my habitual detachment, only to understand the nature of her cry. She was weary and aching and utterly alone. She'd been crying for so long now that soon she would stop from sheer exhaustion. I slipped my hand up under the heavy wooden shutter and pulled it so the bolt slipped. There she sat in the dark room beside a dead woman. A woman who'd been dead for some days. The room itself was cluttered with trunks and packages, as though a number of people had been packing to leave. But the mother lay half-clothed, her body already in decay, and no one else was there but the child. It was moments before she saw me, but when she did, she began to tell me that I must do something to help her mother. She was only 5, at most, and very thin, and her face was stained with dirt and tears. She begged me to help. They had to take a ship, she said, before the plague came. Their father was waiting. She began to shake her mother now and to cry in the most pathetic and desperate way. And then she looked at me again and burst into the greatest flow of tears. You must understand that by now I was burning with physical need to drink. I could not have made it through another day without feeding, but there were alternatives. Rats abounded in the streets, and somewhere very near a dog was howling hopelessly. I might have pied the room had I chosen and fed and gotten back easily. But the question pounded in me. Am I damned? If so, why do I feel such pity for her gaunt face? Why do I wish to touch her tiny soft arms, hold her now on my knee as I am doing, feel her bend her head to my chest as I gently touch the satin hair? Why do I do this? If I am damned, I must want to kill her. I must want to make her nothing but food for a cursed existence, because being damned, I must hate her. And when I thought of this, I saw Babette's face contorted with hatred when she had held the lantern waiting to light it, and I saw Lestat in my mind and hated him, and I felt, yes, damned, and this is hell. And in that instant, I had bent down and driven hard into her soft, small neck, and hearing her tiny cry, whispered even as I felt the hot blood on my lips, "It's only for a moment, and there'll be no more pain." But she was locked to me, and I was soon incapable of saying anything. For 4 years I had not savoured a human. For 4 years I hadn't really known. And now I heard her heart in that terrible rhythm, and such a heart, not the heart of a man or an animal, but the rapid, tenacious heart of the child, beating harder and harder, refusing to die, beating like a tiny fist beating on a door, crying, "I will not die, I will not die, I cannot die, I cannot die." I think I rose to my feet, still locked to her, the heart pulling my heart faster with no hope of cease. The rich blood rushing too fast for me, the room reeling. And then, despite myself, I was staring over her bent head, her open mouth, down through the gloom at the mother's face, and through the half-masked lids. Her eyes gleamed at me as if they were alive. I threw the child down. She lay like a jointless doll, and turning in blind horror of the mother to flee, I saw the window filled with a familiar shape. It was Lestat, who backed away from it now, laughing, his body bent as he danced in the mud street.
"Louis, Louis,"
he taunted me, and pointed a long, bone-thin finger at me, as if to say he'd caught me in the act. And now he bounded over the sill, brushing me aside, and grabbed the mother's stinking body from the bed and made to dance with her.
Good God,
whispered Daniel.
Yes, I might have said the same,
said the vampire.
He stumbled over the child as he pulled the mother along in widening circles, singing as he danced, her matted hair falling in her face as her head snapped back and a black fluid poured out of her mouth. He threw her down. I was out of the window and running down the street, and he was running after me.
"Are you afraid of me, Louises?"
he shouted.
"Are you afraid? The child's alive, Louis. You left her breathing. Shall I go back and make her a vampire? We could use her, Louis, and think of all the pretty dresses we could buy for her. Louis. Wait, Louis. I'll go back for her if you say.
And so he ran after me all the way back to the hotel, all the way across the rooftops, where I hoped to lose him, until I leapt in the window of the parlor and turned in rage and slammed the window shut. He hit it, arms outstretched, like a bird who seeks to fly through glass, and shook the frame. I was utterly out of my mind. I went round and round the room looking for some way to kill him. I pictured his body burned to a crisp on the roof below. Reason had altogether left me, so that I was consummate rage, and when he came through the broken glass, we fought as we'd never fought before. It was hell that stopped me, the thought of hell, of us being two souls in hell that grappled in hatred. I lost my confidence, my purpose, my grip. I was down on the floor then, and he was standing over me, his eyes cold, though his chest heaved.
You're a fool, Louis,
he said. His voice was calm. It was so calm it brought me around.
The sun's coming up,
he said, his chest heaving slightly from the struggle, his eyes narrow as he looked at the window. I'd never seen him quite like this. The fight had got the better of him in some way, or something had.
Get in your coffin,
he said to me, without even the slightest anger.
But tomorrow night, we talk.
Well, I was more than slightly amazed. Lestat talk. I couldn't imagine this. Never had Lestat and I really talked. I think I have described to you with accuracy our sparring matches, our angry go-rounds.
He was desperate for the money, for your houses.
Said Daniel.
Or was it that he was as afraid to be alone as you were?
These questions occurred to me. It even occurred to me that Lestat meant to kill me, some way that I didn't know. You see, I wasn't sure then why I awoke each evening when I did, whether it was automatic when the death-like sleep left me, and why it happened sometimes earlier than at other times. It was one of the things Lestat would not explain, and he was often up before me. He was my superior in all the mechanics, as I've indicated, and I shut the coffin that morning with a kind of despair. I should explain now, though, that the shutting of the coffin is always disturbing. It is rather like going under a modern anesthetic on an operating table. Even a casual mistake on the part of an intruder might mean death.
But how could he have killed you? He couldn't have exposed you to the light. He couldn't have stood it himself.
This is true, but rising before me, he might have nailed my coffin shut, or set it afire. The principal thing was, I didn't know what he might do, what he might know that I still did not know. But there was nothing to be done about it then, and with thoughts of the dead woman and child still in any brain, and the sun rising, I had no energy left to argue with him, and lay down to miserable dreams.
You do dream,
Said Daniel.
Often,
Said the vampire.
I wish sometimes that I did not. For such dreams, such long and clear dreams, I never had as a mortal, and such twisted nightmares I never had either. In my early days, these dreams so absorbed me that often it seemed I fought waking as long as I could, and lay sometimes for hours after one of these dreams until the night was half gone. And dazed by them, I often wandered about seeking to understand their meaning. They were in many ways as elusive as the dreams of mortals. I dreamed of my brother, for instance, that he was near me in some state between life and death, calling to me for help. And often I dreamed of Babette, and often, almost always, there was a great wasteland backdrop to my dreams. That wasteland of night I'd seen when cursed by Babette, as I've told you. It was as if all figures walked and talked on the desolate home of my damned soul. I don't remember what I dreamed that day, Perhaps because I remember too well what Lestat and I discussed the following evening. I see you're anxious for that too. Well, as I've said, Lestat amazed me in his new calm, his thoughtfulness. But that evening, I didn't wake to find him the same way. Not at first. There were women in the parlour. The candles were a few, scattered on the small table and the carved buffet, and Lestat had his arm around one woman and was kissing her. She was very drunk and very beautiful, a great drug doll of a woman with her careful coif falling slowly down on her bare shoulders and over her partially bared breasts. The other woman sat over a ruined supper table drinking a glass of wine. I could see that the three of them had dined, Lestat pretending to dine. You would be surprised how people do not notice that a vampire is only pretending to eat. And the woman at the table was bored. All this put me in a fit of agitation. I did not know what Lestat was up to. If I went into the room, the woman would turn her attentions to me, and what was to happen I couldn't imagine, except that Lestat meant for us to kill them both. The woman on the settee with him was already teasing about his kisses, his coldness, his lack of desire for her. And the woman at the table watched with black almond eyes that seemed to be filled with satisfaction. When Lestat rose and came to her, putting his hands on her bare white arms, she brightened. Bending now to kiss her, he saw me through the crack in the door, and his eyes just stared at me for a moment, and then he went on talking with the ladies. He bent down and blew out the candles on the table.
"It's too dark in here,"
said the woman on the couch.
"Leave us alone."
said the other woman. Lestat sat down and beckoned her to sit in his lap, and she did, putting her left arm around his neck, her right hand smoothing back his yellow hair.
"Your skin's icy,"
she said, recoiling slightly.
Not always.
Said Lestat, and then he buried his face in the flesh of her neck. I was watching all this with fascination. Lestat was masterfully clever and utterly vicious, but I didn't know how clever he was until he sank his teeth into her now, his thumb pressing down on her throat, his other arm locking her tight, so that he drank his fill without the other woman even knowing.
Your friend has no head for wine,
he said, slipping out of the chair and seating the unconscious woman there, her arms folded under her face on the table.
"She's stupid,"
said the other woman, who had gone to the window and had been looking out at the lights. New Orleans was then a city of many low buildings, as you probably know. And on such clear nights as this, the lamplit streets were beautiful from the high windows of this new Spanish hotel, and the stars of those days bung low over such dim light as they do at sea.
"I can warm that cold skin of yours better than she can."
She turned to Lestat, and I must confess I was feeling some relief that he would now take care of her as well. But he planned nothing so simple.
Do you think so?
He said to her. He took her hand and she said,
"Why? You're warm."
You mean the blood had warmed him?
said Daniel.
"Oh yes,"
said the vampire.
"After killing, a vampire is as warm as you are now."
And he started to resume. Then glancing at Daniel, he smiled.
As I was saying, Lestat now held the woman's hand in his and said that the other had warmed him. His face, of course, was flushed, much altered. He drew her close now, and she kissed him, remarking through her laughter that he was a veritable furnace of passion.
"Ah, but the price is high,"
he said to her, affecting sadness.
"Your pretty friend."
He shrugged his shoulders.
"I exhausted her."
And he stood back as if inviting the woman to walk to the table. And she did, a look of superiority on her small features. She bent down to see her friend, but then lost interest, until she saw something. It was a napkin. It had caught the last drops of blood from the wound in the throat. She picked it up, straining to see it in the darkness.
"Take down your hair,"
said Lestat softly. And she dropped it, indifferent, and took down the last tresses, so that her hair fell blonde and wavy down her back.
"Soft,"
he said.
"So soft. I picture you that way, lying on a bed of satin."
Such things you say.
She scoffed and turned her back on him playfully.
"Do you know what manner of bed?"
he asked, and she laughed and said his bed. She could imagine. She looked back at him as he advanced, and never once looking away from her, he gently tipped the body of her friend, so that it fell backwards from the chair and lay with staring eyes upon the floor. The woman gasped. She scrambled away from the corpse, nearly upsetting a small end table. The candle went over and went out.
"Put out the light, and then put out the light,"
Lestat said softly. And then he took her into his arms like a struggling moth and sank his teeth into her.
But what were you thinking as you watched?
asked Daniel.
Did you want to stop him the way you wanted to stop him from killing Frenier?
No,
said the vampire.
I could not have stopped him. And you must understand, I knew that he killed humans every night. Animals gave him no satisfaction whatsoever. Animals were to be banked on when all else failed, but never to be chosen. If I felt any sympathy for the women, it was buried deep in my own turmoil. I still felt in my chest the little hammer heart of that starving child. I still burned with the questions of my own divided nature. I was angry that Lestat had staged this show for me, waiting till I woke to kill the women. And I wondered again if I might somehow break loose from him, and felt both hatred and my own weakness more than ever. Meantime, he propped their lovely corpses at the table and went about the room lighting all the candles until it blazed as if for a wedding.
"Come in, Louis,"
he said.
"I would have arranged an escort for you, but I know what a man you are about choosing your own. Pity Mademoiselle Frenier likes to hurl flaming lanterns. It makes a party unwieldy, don't you think? Especially for a hotel."
He seated the blonde-haired girl so that her head lay to one side against the damask back of the chair, and the darker woman lay with her chin resting just above her breasts. This one had blanched, and her features had a rigid look to them already, as though she was one of those women in whom the fire of personality makes beauty. But the other looked only as if she slept, and I wasn't sure that she was even dead. Lestat had made 2 gashes, one in her throat and one above her left breast, and both still bled freely. He lifted her wrist now, and slitting it with a knife, filled 2 wine glasses and bade me to sit down. "I'm leaving you," I said to him at once. "I wish to tell you that now."
"I thought as much,"
he answered, sitting back in the chair.
"and I thought as well that you would make a flowery announcement. Tell me what a monster I am, what a vulgar fiend."
"I make no judgments upon you. I'm not interested in you. I am interested in my own nature now, and I've come to believe I can't trust you to tell me the truth about it. You use knowledge for personal power," I told him. And I suppose, in the manner of many people making such an announcement, I was not looking to him at all. I was mainly listening to my own words, but now I saw that his face was once again the way it had been when he'd said we would talk. He was listening to me. I was suddenly at a loss. I felt that gulf between us as painfully as ever. "Why did you become a vampire?" I blurted out. "And why such a vampire as you are? Vengeful and delighting in taking human life even when you have no need. This girl, why did you kill her when one would have done? And why did you frighten her so before you killed her? And why have you propped her here in some grotesque manner, as if tempting the gods to strike you down for your blasphemy. All this he listened to without speaking, and in the pause that followed, I again felt at a loss. Lestat's eyes were large and thoughtful. I'd seen them that way before, but I couldn't remember when. Certainly not when talking to me.
What do you think a vampire is?
He asked me sincerely. I don't pretend to know. You pretend to know. What is it? I asked. And to this, he answered nothing. It was as if he sensed the insincerity of it, the spite. He just sat there looking at me with the same still expression. Then I said, I know that after leaving you, I shall try to find out. I'll travel the world, if I have to find other vampires. I know they must exist. I don't know of any reasons why they shouldn't exist in great numbers. And I'm confident I shall find vampires who have more in common with me than I with you. Vampires who understand knowledge as I do and have used their superior vampire nature to learn secrets of which you don't even dream. If you haven't told me everything, I shall find things out for myself or from them when I find them. He shook his head.
Louis,
he said.
You are in love with your mortal nature. You chase after the phantoms of your former self. Freniere, his sister. These are images for you of what you were and what you still long to be. And in your romance with mortal life, you're dead to your vampire nature.
I objected to this at once. My vampire nature has been for me the greatest adventure of my life. All that went before it was confused, clouded. I went through mortal life like a blind man groping from solid object to solid object. It was only when I became a vampire that I respected for the first time all of life. I never saw a living, pulsing human being until I was a vampire. I never knew what life was until it ran out in a red gush over my lips, my hands. I found myself staring at the two women, the darker one now turning a terrible shade of blue. The blonde was breathing. She's not dead, I said to him suddenly.
I know. Let her alone,
he said. He lifted her wrist and made a new gash by the scab of the other and filled his glass.
All that you say makes sense,
he said to me, taking a drink.
You are an intellect. I've never been. What I've learned from listening to men talk, not from books. I never went to school long enough. But I'm not stupid, and you must listen to me because you are in danger. You do not know your vampire nature. You are like an adult who, looking back on his childhood, realizes that he never appreciated it. You cannot, as a man, go back to the nursery and play with your toys, asking for the love and care to be showered on you again simply because now you know their worth. So it is with you and mortal nature. You've given it up. You no longer look through a glass darkly. But you cannot pass back to the world of human warmth with your new eyes.
I know that well enough, I said. But what is it that is our nature? If I can live from the blood of animals, why should I not live from the blood of animals rather than go through the world bringing misery and death to human creatures?
Does it bring you happiness?
He asked.
You wander through the night, feeding on rats like a pauper, and then moon at Babette's window, filled with care, yet helpless as the goddess who came by night to watch Endymion sleep, and could not have him. And suppose you could hold her in your arms, and she would look on you without horror or disgust, what then? A few short years to watch her suffer every prick of mortality, and then die before your eyes. Does this give happiness? This is insanity, Louis. This is vain. And what truly lies before you is vampire nature, which is killing. For I guarantee you that if you walk the streets tonight and strike down a woman as rich and beautiful as Babette, and suck her blood until she drops at your feet, you will have no hunger left for Babette's profile in the candlelight, or for listening by the window for the sound of her voice. You will be filled, Louis, as you were meant to be, with all the life that you can hold. And you will have hunger when that's gone for the same, and the same, and the same. The red in this glass will be just as red, the roses on the wallpaper just as delicately drawn. And you'll see the moon the same way, and the flicker of a candle. And with that same sensibility that you cherish, you will see death in all its beauty, life as it is only known on the very point of death. Don't you understand that, Louis? You alone of all creatures can see death that way with impunity. You, alone, under the rising moon, can strike like the hand of God.
He sat back now and drained the glass, and his eyes moved over the unconscious woman. Her breasts heaved, and her eyebrows knit as if she were coming around. A moan escaped her lips. He'd never spoken such words to me before, and I had not thought him capable of it.
Vampires are killers,
he said now.
Predators, whose all-seeing eyes were meant to give them detachment. The ability to see a human life in its entirety, not with any mawkish sorrow, but with a thrilling satisfaction in being the end of that life, in having a hand in the divine plan.
That is how you see it, I protested. The girl moaned again. Her face was very white. Her head rolled against the back of the chair.
That is the way it is,
he answered.
You talk of finding other vampires. Vampires are killers. They don't want you, or your sensibility. They'll see you coming long before you see them, and they'll see your flaw, and distrusting you, they'll seek to kill you. They'd seek to kill you even if you were like me, because they are lone predators and seek for companionship no more than cats in the jungle. They're jealous of their secret and of their territory, and if you find one or more of them together, it will be for safety only, and one will be the slave of the other, the way you are of me.
I'm not your slave, I said to him. But even as he spoke, I realized I'd been his slave all along.
That's how vampires increase, through slavery. How else?
He asked. He took the girl's wrist again, and she cried out as the knife cut. She opened her eyes slowly as he held her wrist over the glass. She blinked and strained to keep them open. It was as if a veil covered her eyes.
You're tired, aren't you?
He asked her. She gazed at him as if she couldn't really see him.
Tired,
he said, now leaning close and staring into her eyes.
You want to sleep?
Yes.
She moaned softly, and he picked her up and took her into the bedroom. Our coffins rested on the carpet and against the wall. There was a velvet-draped bed. Lestat did not put her on the bed. He lowered her slowly into his coffin. "What are you doing?" I asked him, coming to the doorsill. The girl was looking around like a terrified child.
No.
She was moaning. And then, as he closed the lid, she screamed. She continued to scream within the coffin. "Why do you do this, Lestat?" I asked.
I like to do it,
he said.
I enjoy it.
He looked at me.
I don't say that you have to enjoy it. Take your aesthete's tastes to purer things. Kill them swiftly, if you will, but do it. Learn that you're a killer. Ah!
He threw up his hands in disgust. The girl had stopped screaming. Now he drew up a little curved-legged chair beside the coffin, and crossing his legs, he looked at the coffin lid. His was a black varnished coffin, not a pure rectangular box as they are now, but tapered at both ends and widest, where the corpse might lay his hands upon his chest. It suggested the human form. It opened, and the girl sat up astonished, wild-eyed, her lips blue and trembling.
"Lie down, love,"
he said to her, and pushed her back, and she lay near hysterical, staring up at him.
"You're dead, love,"
he said to her, and she screamed and turned desperately in the coffin like a fish, as if her body could escape through the sides, through the bottom.
It's a coffin. A coffin.
She cried.
Let me out.
"But we all must lie in coffins eventually,"
he said to her.
"Lie still, love. This is your coffin. Most of us never get to know what it feels like. You know what it feels like,"
he said to her. I couldn't tell whether she was listening or not, or just going wild, but she saw me in the doorway, and then she lay still, looking at Lestat, and then at me.
Help me,
she said to me. Lestat looked at me.
"I expected you to feel these things instinctually, as I did,"
he said.
"When I gave you that first kill, I thought you would hunger for the next, and the next, that you would go to each human life as if to a full cup, the way I had. But you didn't. And all this time, I suppose, I kept from straightening you out, because you were best weaker. I'd watch you playing shadow in the night, staring at the falling rain, and I'd think, he's easy to manage, he's simple. But you're weak, Lewis. You're a mark, for vampires and now for humans alike. This thing with Babette has exposed us both. It's as if you want us both to be destroyed."
I can't stand to watch what you're doing, I said, turning my back. The girl's eyes were burning into my flesh. She lay, all the time he spoke, staring at me.
"You can stand it,"
he said.
"I saw you last night with that child. You're a vampire, the same as I am."
He stood up and came towards me, but the girl rose again, and he turned to shove her down.
"Do you think we should make her a vampire? Share our lives with her?"
he asked. Instantly I said, "No."
"Why, because she's nothing but a whore?"
he asked.
"A damned expensive whore at that,"
he said. "Can she live now, or has she lost too much?" I asked him.
"Touching,"
he said.
"She can't live."
"Then kill her." She began to scream. He just sat there. I turned around. He was smiling, and the girl had turned her face to the satin and was sobbing. Her reason had almost entirely left her. She was crying and praying. She was praying to the Virgin to save her, her hands over her face now over her head, the wrist smearing blood in her hair and on the satin. I bent over the coffin. She was dying, it was true. Her eyes were burning, but the tissue around them was already bluish, and now she smiled.
You won't let me die, will you?
She whispered.
You'll save me.
Lestat reached over and took her wrist.
"But it's too late, love,"
he said.
"Look at your wrist, your breast."
And then he touched the wound in her throat. She put her hands to her throat and gasped, her mouth open, the scream strangled. I stared at Lestat. I could not understand why he did this. His face was as smooth as mine is now, more animated for the blood, but cold and without emotion. He did not leer like a stage villain, nor hunger for her suffering as if the cruelty fed him. He simply watched her.
I never meant to be bad,
she was crying.
I only did what I had to do. You won't let this happen to me. You'll let me go. I can't die like this. I can't.
She was sobbing, the sobs dry and thin.
You'll let me go. I have to go to the priest. You'll let me go.
"But my friend is a priest,"
said Lestat, smiling, as if he'd just thought of it as a joke.
"This is your funeral, dear. You see, you were at a dinner party and you died. But God has given you another chance to be absolved. Don't you see? Tell him your sins.
She shook her head at first, and then she looked at me again with those pleading eyes.
Is it true?
She whispered.
Well,
Said Lestat.
I suppose you're not contrite, dear. I shall have to shut the lid.
Stop this, Lestat, I shouted at him. The girl was screaming again, and I could not stand the sight of it any longer. I bent down to her and took her hand.
I can't remember my sins,
She said, just as I was looking at her wrist, resolved to kill her. You mustn't try. Tell God only that you are sorry, I said, and then you'll die, and it will be over. She lay back, and her eyes shut. I sank my teeth into her wrist and began to suck her dry. She stirred once as if dreaming and said a name. And then, when I felt her heartbeat reach that hypnotic slowness, I drew back from her, dizzy, confused for the moment, my hands reaching for the door frame. I saw her as if in a dream. The candles glared in the corner of my eye. I saw her lying utterly still, and Lestat sat composed beside her like a mourner. His face was still.
Louis,
He said to me.
don't you understand? Peace will only come to you when you can do this every night of your life. There is nothing else. But this is everything.
His voice was almost tender as he spoke, and he rose and put both his hands on my shoulders. I walked into the parlour, shying away from his touch, but not resolute enough to push him off.
Come with me, out into the streets. It's late. You haven't drunk enough. Let me show you what you are, really. Forgive me if I bungled it, left too much to nature. Come.
I can't bear it, Lestat, I said to him. You chose your companion badly.
But Louis,
He said.
you haven't tried.
The vampire stopped. He was studying Daniel, and Daniel, astonished, said nothing.
It was true what he'd said. I had not drunk enough, and shaken by the girl's fear, I let him lead me out of the hotel, down the back stairs. People were coming now from the Conde Street ballroom, and the narrow street was jammed. There were supper parties in the hotels, and the planter families were lodged in town in great numbers, and we passed through them like a nightmare. My agony was unbearable. Never since I was a human being had I felt such mental pain. It was because all of Lestat's words had made sense to me. I knew peace only when I killed, only for that minute, and there was no question in my mind that the killing of anything less than a human being brought nothing but a vague longing, the discontent which had brought me close to humans, to watch their lives through glass. I was no vampire, and in my pain I asked irrationally, like a child, could I not return? Could I not be human again? Even as the blood of that girl was warm in me, and I felt that physical thrill and strength, I asked that question. The faces of humans passed me like candle flames in the night, dancing on dark waves. I was sinking into the darkness. I was weary of longing. I was going around and around in the street, looking at the stars and thinking, yes, it's true. I know what he is saying is true, that when I kill, there is no longing. And I can't bear this truth. I can't bear it. Suddenly, there was one of those arresting moments. The street was utterly quiet. We had strayed far from the main part of the old town and were near the ramparts. There were no lights, only the fire in a window and the far-off sound of people laughing. But no one here, no one near us. I could feel the breeze suddenly from the river and the hot air of the night rising, and Lestat near me, so still he might have been made of stone. Over the long, low row of pointed roofs were the massive shapes of oak trees in the dark, great swaying forms of myriad sounds under the low-hung stars. The pain for the moment was gone. The confusion was gone. I closed my eyes and heard the wind and the sound of water flowing softly, swiftly in the river. It was enough for one moment, and I knew that it would not endure, that it would fly away from me like something torn out of my arms, and I would fly after it, more desperately lonely than any creature under God, to get it back. And then a voice beside it rumbled deep in the sound of the night, a drum beat as the moment ended, saying, "Do what it is your nature to do. This is but a taste of it. Do what it is your nature to do." And the moment was gone. I stood like the girl in the parlor in the hotel, dazed and ready for the slightest suggestion. I was nodding at Lestat as he nodded at me.
"Pain is terrible for you,"
he said.
"You feel it like no other creature because you are a vampire. You don't want it to go on."
"No," I answered him. "I'll feel as I felt with her, wed to her and weightless, caught as if by a dance."
"That and more."
His hand tightened on mine.
"Don't turn away from it. Come with me."
He led me quickly through the street, turning every time I hesitated, his hand out for mine, a smile on his lips, his presence as marvelous to me as the night he'd come in my mortal life and told me we would be vampires.
"Evil is a point of view,"
he whispered now.
"We are immortal, and what we have before us are the rich feasts that conscience cannot appreciate and mortal men cannot know without regret. God kills, and so shall we. Indiscriminately, he takes the richest and the poorest, and so shall we. For no creatures under God are as we are, none so like him as ourselves. Dark angels not confined to the stinking limits of hell, but wandering his earth and all its kingdoms. I want a child tonight. I am like a mother. I want a child."
I should have known what he meant. I did not. He had me mesmerized, enchanted. He was playing to me as he had when I was mortal. He was leading me. He was saying,
"Your pain will end."
We'd come to a street of lighted windows. It was a place of rooming houses, sailors, flatboat men. We entered a narrow door, and then, in a hollow stone passage, in which I could hear my own breath like the wind, he crept along the wall until his shadow leapt out in the light of a doorway beside the shadow of another man, their heads bent together, their whispers like the rustling of dry leaves. "What is it?" I drew near him as he came back, afraid suddenly this exhilaration in me would die. I saw again that nightmare landscape I'd seen when I spoke with Babette. I felt the chill of loneliness, the chill of guilt.
"She's there,"
he said.
"Your wounded one. Your daughter."
"What do you say? What are you talking about?"
"You've saved her,"
he whispered.
"I knew it. You left the window wide on her and her dead mother, and people passing in the street brought her here."
"The child, the little girl," I gasped. But he was already leading me through the door to stand at the end of the long ward of wooden beds, each with a child beneath a narrow white blanket, one candle at the end of the ward, where a nurse bent over a small desk. We walked down the aisle between the rows.
"Starving children, orphans,"
he said.
"Children of plague and fever."
He stopped. I saw the little girl lying in the bed, and then the man was coming, and he was whispering with Lestat. Such care for the sleeping little ones. Someone in another room was crying. The nurse rose and hurried away. And now the doctor bent and wrapped the child in the blanket. Lestat had taken money from his pocket and set it on the foot of the bed. The doctor was saying how glad he was we'd come for her, how most of them were orphans. They came in on the ships, sometimes orphans too young even to tell which body was that of their mother. He thought Lestat was the father. And in moments, Lestat was running through the streets with her, the white of the blanket gleaming against his dark coat and cape. And even to my expert vision, as I ran after him, it seemed sometimes as if the blanket drew through the night with no one holding it. A shifting shape travelling on the wind like a leaf, stood upright and sent scurrying along a passage, trying to gain the wind all the while and truly take flight. I caught him finally as we approached the lamps near the Place d'Armes. The child lay pale on his shoulder, her cheeks still full like plums, though she was drained and near death. She opened her eyes, or rather, the lids slid back, and beneath the long curling lashes I saw a streak of white. "Lestat, what are you doing? Where are you taking her?" I demanded, but I knew too well. He was heading for the hotel and meant to take her into our room. The corpses were as we left them, one neatly set in the coffin as if an undertaker had already attended her, the other in her chair at the table. Lestat brushed past them as if he didn't see them, while I watched him in fascination. The candles had all burned down, and the only light was that of the moon and the street. I could see his iced and gleaming profile as he set the child down on the pillow.
"Come here, Louis, you haven't fed enough. I know you haven't,"
he said, with the same calm, convincing voice he had used skillfully all evening. He held my hand in his own warm and tight.
"See her, Louis, how plump and sweet she looks, as if even death can't take her freshness. The will to live is too strong. He might make a sculpture of her tiny lips and rounded hands, but he cannot her faded. You remember the way you wanted her when you saw her in that room."
I resisted him. I didn't want to kill her. I hadn't wanted to last night. And then suddenly I remembered two conflicting things and was torn in agony. I remembered the powerful beating of her heart against mine, and I hungered for it. Hungered for it so badly I turned my back on her in the bed and would have rushed out of the room had not Lestat held me fast. And I remembered her mother's face and that moment of horror when I dropped the child and he'd come into the room. But he wasn't mocking me now. He was confusing me.
"You want her, Louis. Don't you see, once you've taken her, then you can take whomever you wish. You wanted her last night, but you weakened, and that's why she's not dead."
I could feel it was true, what he said. I could feel again that ecstasy of being pressed to her, her little heart going and going. "She's too strong for me. Her heart, it wouldn't give up," I said to him.
"Is she so strong?"
He smiled. He drew me close to him.
"Take her, Louis. I know you want her."
And I did. I drew close to the bed now and just watched her. Her chest barely moved with her breath, and one small hand was tangled in her long gold hair. I couldn't bear it, looking at her, wanting her not to die and wanting her. And the more I looked at her, the more I could taste her skin, feel my arms sliding under her back and pulling her up to me, feeling her soft neck. Soft, soft. That's what she was, so soft. I tried to tell myself it was best for her to die. What was to become of her? But these were lying thoughts. I wanted her. And so I took her in my arms and held her, her burning cheek on mine, her hair down over my wrists and brushing my eyelids, the sweet perfume of a child strong and pulsing in spite of sickness and death. She moaned how, stirred in her sleep, and that was more than I could bear. I'd kill her before I'd let her wake and know it. I went into her throat and heard Lestat saying to me strangely,
"Just a little tear. It's just a little throat."
And I obeyed him. I won't tell you again what it was like, except that it caught me up just as it had done before, and as killing always does, only more, so that my knees bent and I half lay on the bed, sucking her dry. That heart pounding again that would not slow, would not give up. And suddenly, as I went on and on, the instinctual part of me waiting for the slowing of the heart, which would mean death. Lestat wrenched me from her. "But she's not dead," I whispered. But it was over. The furniture of the room merged from the darkness. I sat stunned, staring at her, too weak to move, my head rolling back against the headboard of the bed, my hands pressing down on the velvet spread. Lestat was snatching her up, talking to her, saying a name.
Claudia, Claudia, listen to me. Come round, Claudia.
He was carrying her now out of the bedroom into the parlour, and his voice was so soft I barely heard him. "You're ill. Do you hear me? You must do as I tell you to get well." And then, in the pause that followed, I came to my senses. I realized what he was doing, that he had cut his wrist and given it to her, and she was drinking.
That's it, dear. More,
He was saying to her.
You must drink it to get well.
"Damn you," I shouted, and he hissed at me with blazing eyes. He sat on the settee with her locked to his wrist. I saw her white hand clutching at his sleeve, and I could see his chest heaving for breath and his face contorted the way I'd never seen it. He let out a moan and whispered again to her to go on, and when I moved from the threshold, he glared at me again, as if to say,
I'll kill you.
"But why, Lestat?" I whispered to him. He was trying now to push her off, and she wouldn't let go. With her fingers locked around his fingers and arm, she held the wrist to her mouth, a growl coming out of her. "Stop, stop," he said to her. He was clearly in pain. He pulled back from her and held her shoulders with both hands. She tried desperately to reach his wrist with her teeth, but she couldn't. And then she looked at him with the most innocent astonishment. He stood back, his hand out lest she move. Then he clapped a handkerchief on his wrist and backed away from her toward the bell rope. He pulled it sharply, his eyes still fixed on her. "What have you done, Lestat?" I asked him. "What have you done?" I stared at her. She sat composed, revived, filled with life. No sign of pallor or weakness in her. Her legs stretched out straight on the damask. Her white gown soft and thin like an angel's gown around her small form. She was looking at Lestat.
Not me,
He said to her.
ever again. Do you understand? But I'll show you what to do.
When I tried to make him look at me and answer me as to what he was doing, he shook me off. He gave me such a blow with his arm that I hit the wall. Someone was knocking now. I knew what he meant to do. Once more I tried to reach out for him, but he spun so fast I didn't even see him hit me. When I did see again, I was sprawled in the chair and he was opening the door.
Yes, come in, please. There's been an accident.
He said to the young slave boy. And then shutting the door, he took him from behind so that the boy never knew what happened. And even as he knelt over the body drinking, he beckoned for the child, who slid from the couch and went down on her knees and took the wrist offered her, quickly pushing back the cuff of the shirt. She gnawed as if she meant to devour his flesh, and then Lestat showed her what to do. He sat back and let her have the rest, his eye on the boy's chest, so that when it stopped, he bent forward and said,
No more. He's dying. You must never drink after the heart stops, or you'll be sick again. Sick to death. Do you understand?
But she'd had enough, and she sat next to him with their backs against the legs of the settee, their legs stretched out on the floor. The boy died in seconds. I felt weary and sickened, as if the night had lasted 1,000 years. I sat there watching them, the child drawing close to Lestat now, snuggling near him as he slipped his arm around her, though his indifferent eyes remained fixed on the corpse.
A child, a vampire child, created in the most brutal of ways and immediately bonded with her maker. You've been listening to Louis de Pointe-du-Lac. Tonight we witnessed his transformation, his harrowing first hunt, and the shocking, almost incomprehensible creation of Claudia, a child who would become, in his words, Lestat's and Louis's daughter. The dynamic of this unholy family and the dark path they forged together is a tale unlike any other, and it's one we will continue to explore. Join me next Friday at midnight, right here on Midnight Tapes, as Louis delves into the terrifying reality of life with a child vampire and the profound impact she had on their eternal existence. Until then, this is Daniel Malloy, reminding you that sometimes the darkest truths are stranger than any fiction. Good night.